Oh, okay, so good evening. It's been a while since I've done a live stream. It's been an interesting period of time. Obviously, we've had the FA Cup, fourth round. We've had the first two weekends of the Six Nations. So there's been a lot of sport on. Obviously, the Super Bowl is taking place this evening. I'm not watching that. I've got to be up so early for work. And for me, American football sort of lost a bit of enjoyment for me. I don't enjoy the NFL anymore. Um, I don't enjoy the CFL anymore. I've sort of fallen out of love with American football. There's nothing wrong with the sport per se. It's just a sport that I don't um, feel that connection with anymore. But if you're watching the Super Bowl, it is on tonight. Two teams with two quarterbacks who both have losing records in the regular season. Um, yeah, I mean, Liverpool have had a lot of players missing in the last couple of months with like injuries, COVID, and the African Cup of Nations. Um, their squad depth has been tested. However, look, they're still in the FA Cup, still in Europe. Um, they're still technically in the title hunt. I think Man City have got enough of a buffer, but they're still technically within a chance of winning the title. So we'll see what happens. We'll see how like the various cup competitions affect Man City and the teams around them, and yeah, go from there. Really, they've still got a great chance to win several trophies this season. So, and they are one of the best teams in the country, if not Europe. So, you can never discount anything in the modern game. Yes, we have. Well, there's been a lot of live sport in the last couple of weeks, and then there's been a lot of sport to watch. I had to cherry pick the live sport last weekend, which was frustrating. I obviously missed the NRL All Star matches in both the men and women's um, eh, the All Star weekend, the Maori Indigenous All Star matchups, which I'll just catch up on in the week. So we've just got over 6 weeks until the NRL season starts. So we're into the fully into the preseason now with the NRL. So I will do my NRL season preview video. I'm not going to predict anything with the NRL, but it's going to be a very interesting season. That's one thing for certain this year. Another tweak to the rule changes, although no massive rule changes, which is good. They're allowing the rule changes that they brought in the last couple of years to stabilise. Um, so we'll see what happens there. What's my favourite formation in football? I prefer a 4-3-3. Or a 4-5-1 with two sort of interchangeable. I say a 4-5-1. It's those wide players that can become a three at the front or an extra bit of width at the back. I also like the sweeper position, so that's an interesting one. But it's each formation has its benefits and its drawbacks. I don't think there's a perfect footballing formation. If you're looking at how to set a team up tactically, but you've got to play players in the right sort of areas on the field. So we've seen some coaches experiment with certain players sort of out of position and in different roles, which take away from their natural attributes. Um, but we'll see. We'll see what happens in regards to some of the formations going forward. A 4-2-3-1. That you've got four lines then, and then you've got you know a lot of forward players, but not enough defensive cover. So you've got to balance the team right. You're going to need those box to box midfielders, which is why I sort of like a 4-2-3-1. So yeah, sort of like that, but a bit more hybrid, where you could have like a five or a four. But you've got to have that width because play too centrally congests things break down, and you need to be flexible. Um, So yeah, I sort of understand where you're coming from, but if that's your rigid basic formation, then you need those wide players to basically be wing backs, basically. So you could end up with six at the back in a defensive situation, and then going forward, you could have six going forward. It depends on your transition play for that formation to work. But if that's your basic starting lineup, it has a lot of drawbacks. especially if you've got two defensive holding midfielders, and you're trying to play an attack-based play. You're better off having two midfielders, one of a more attacking sense, one more of a holding sense. But we'll see. Again, that's a formation you can do a lot of basic tweaks to, which allows for more variation, I suppose. But a 4-3-3 with a high press works pretty well, um, and a 4-5-1 where you can have an interchangeable attacking midfielder, or a 4-4-1-1 works pretty well, where the two forward players, there's a good link between the congested midfield where you can break down the opposition attacks, and then a link player to link with the player sticking up front works pretty well as well. But even the bog standard 4-4-2, which you get taught in school at school level, you can do a lot of variations with how you set up the midfield for, and there's various. Uh, every formation's got its pros and cons. I like having a strike partnership or a front three. I think that creates more problems for your back line. Doesn't matter if it's a back three, a back four, a back five, sometimes even a back six. If you've got more attacking options, it creates more difficulty for your back line, your centre backs, your defensive midfielders, if you do use a sweeper kind of format, because they've got to pick up that extra player or extra players, and so therefore the attacker can lose his man and get in between gaps. So, but each formation has its pros and cons. Who's getting top four? Wolves, West Ham, or Arsenal? West Ham's form has been a little bit iffy. Arsenal, they just don't have enough grit in their team, and Wolves are a dark horse. That's an open one there. But both Wolves and West Ham are still in the FA Cup, I believe. So especially West Ham, Arsenal don't have a chance for the trophy this season, so they can focus on their league form. But we'll see what happens. Yeah, Wolves have a really weird setup. Um, but they basically try and congest the midfield. That's their goal, is to break up the play in the midfield, frustrate the opposition in the midfield, and hit on the counter. That's what Wolves are all about, as a counter attack team. Um, don't expect Wolves to have lengthy spells in possession. Their style, which has been, even when Mick McCarthy was there, is counter attack and break down the midfield. It doesn't have to be pretty; it's effective. So they have a culture at Wolves, and Spurs are just Spurs, basically. Great manager, Paul Sod. Poor management in the side in regards to the off-field decisions made. Um, Same with Man United. You got to look at the structures in place behind the scenes. You could argue that about any professional sports team. It's not about what happens on the field necessarily, because you can have a very good on-field product or on-ice product or on-court product, depending on what sport we're looking at. It's what happens behind the scenes, the culture, the structures in place, the managerial structures in place, the youth setup, the scouting, the player development side, the player recruitment side, the community, the community arm. The structures behind the scenes tell you a lot about a culture of a team. Spurs have a lot of problems off the field. That's my basic opinion of them, looking from the outside in. I know a lot of Spurs fans, and they're constantly frustrated. I think they say every year is going to be their year. I think as a group, as a collective, I think they peaked a couple of years ago. They had a golden window, as I call it, between 2015, 2016 season and the 2018, 2019 season. That was their opportunity. They've missed the boat with that opportunity, and then a lot of the mistakes that Spurs have made off the field were occurring before, during, and after that period as well. So the fact they come away with no silverware in that period, there needs to be a change behind the scenes in the structures of the club, the day-to-day running of the club, the recruitment, the player development, the scouting, the day-to-day running of the business side. A whole host of changes need to happen behind the scenes, and a lot of the problems, I think, lie with the chairman, lie with the structures that he's put in place, the business model in place, um, and yeah, I could list a lot of problems. Um, I'm not even going to try and predict the final table. I think that's a hard one to predict, because teams like Palace and West Ham and Wolves and all that, they're still in the FA Cup, so they can still get into Europe even if they don't feel finished that highly up the final league table. Um, So I'm not even going to try and predict. I don't think Wolves finish above West Ham. That's my opinion on that. I think Wolves have got a little bit too much work to do. They could do it. They are a dark horse. Southampton are another team that could finish higher up than they currently are. And the relegation battle, I'm looking at Everton to possibly be one of the sides that goes down. They're currently outside the relegation zone, but Newcastle have picked up some form. Norwich, they're a difficult side play against under Dean Smith. They have a good chance of making the great escape. I think Burnley have left themselves too much work to do. They're sticking with Sean Dyche. Whether he stays there post the end of this season is another thing. Um, but yeah, Watford I think are done. They're on their third manager this season. I mean, who wants to manage there is beyond me. With the That's another club with poor off-field structure, and I think they need to look at changing the rules around the managerial go around because it's unsustainable financially for the game. And I think this pandemic has highlighted the unsustainability of some of the business models at some of these clubs. Uh, yeah, but I can see Spurs having problems in the summer in retaining players. I can see Arsenal having another overhaul. And Arsenal have got some good young talent, but they've got no grit in midfield. They've got no gnarliness in the back line. They play too nice. And I've got a lot of friends who are Arsenal fans as well who are regularly critical of the lack of grit in their team, the lack of sandpaper is a good way to look at Arsenal in recent years. They lack that sandpaper. They lack that Vieira um, type player. They lack that Emmanuel Petit, that Ray Parlour. They're just the solid box to box midfielder who can throw a tackle. Um, and you can say the same with Man United. They lack that sandpaper as well. They don't have that Roy Keane type player anymore. So they're too soft. They don't have that Paul Scholes. Admittedly, Paul Scholes couldn't tackle very well, but he was a very good midfielder with a good engine. But they're lacking that in the midfield. I know Smith and Hobbs are actually two very common names. Actually, over here, I've got a friend whose surname is Hobbs, and I've got a few friends whose surname is Smith. They're very very common surnames. I know it's not sport related, but they are quite common surnames over here. Um, there's quite a few Smiths in the Anglo-Saxon, the Commonwealth, as we'll call it, and the US. There's quite a few Smiths. There's been one or two Hobbs floating around, but obviously you've got to remember, not everyone is an athlete. Not everyone makes that transition from school to professional sport. That's just generally something that is a thing. But I wouldn't be. There have been Hobbs in the professional sporting kind of world. It's just um, not a known sporting name, but the Smith surname is definitely uh, a professional sports name in the Commonwealth, so Australia, South Africa, the UK, New Zealand. You got Steve Smith, Australian cricketer. You got Graham Smith, South African former Test cricketer. Quite a few Smiths played rugby and football, and a lot of Alan Smith. Two Alan Smiths played football. Um, but so there's a it's an interesting one. Like, what does your surname mean? Like, how likely is your surname? There's been quite a few Currans, which is my surname in professional sport. Um, so that's an interesting one. It is a very interesting one. Smith is a more common surname in the English speaking world. But, it is interesting. There's quite a few Smiths as a professional athletes in a variety of sports, and it is generally a more common name than Hobbs. Although Hobbs is actually a reasonably common name. I mean, this is going to make you laugh. Christmas is actually a common surname in the Essex area, which is east of London in the southeast. Christmas is actually a very common surname. I've got a few mates whose surnames are actually Christmas. So that is something quite interesting. But no, there's some really interesting names out there that are really rare that are famous in sports. So, but it is interesting the correlation between your surname and are you going to be a professional athlete is quite interesting. Like Rossi, for example, in Italian. or a variation like De Rossi. That's quite a common Italian name in Italian communities for sport as well. So, and Rossi is just generally Italian for red. So um, that's come up quite a few times. So there are some interesting ones. Parise is another interesting name in Italian communities. That's com- got a good sporting pedigree in rugby and ice hockey. So there are um, certain surnames that seem to pop up with sports. But Smith is quite a common one. There's quite a few Smiths who play professional rugby and rugby league. So that's an interesting one. And ice hockey as well. So there's quite a few Smiths out there. But and then athletics as well. Even if it's a double barreled surname, Smith is so common in the English speaking world. So anywhere in the British Commonwealth or the US, Smith is one of the most common surnames in the Anglosphere, as we call it. Um, but then in like other countries, they have their own common surnames. So as I say, Rossi or De Rossi, so any kind of uh, Rossi being red or De Rossi is a variant of it. Um, they're quite common in Italian communities for sport. So Valentino Rossi, Giuseppe Rossi, Paolo Rossi, the famous Italian striker who died last year, who won the '82 Football World Cup. You've got Daniele Di Rossi, the former Roma captain and World Cup winner in 2006. So Rossi's quite a popular surname when it comes to sporting circles. It's just one of them. It's just one of them. I mean, so that is an interesting question. It's a very interesting question, which I think is sports related. I've never really looked into surnames and their links to how many there's surname and linked to professional sports. How many Smiths have there been? How many Currans have there been? There's quite a few Currans floating around who've been professional sportsmen and women over the years, and that's a rare surname. So again, it's just one of them. Um, but that's an interesting one. I do appreciate an interesting question that does test my knowledge. I'm going to have to look at famous Hobbs athletes. Let's actually have a quick look. Let's have a look at the Hobbs surname, because now you got me onto something now, and I'm quite interested. Hobbs, no, not Hobber, Hobbs. Pro athlete. Let's have a look. Actually, yep, there's quite a few. Right, so we've got. Let's have a look. Aaliyah Hobbs, who's an Olympic runner. She's American. You've got Nate Hobbs, who plays for the Las Vegas Raiders, the former Oakland Raiders. He got drafted in the 2021 NFL draft. You've got Arthur Hobbs, who plays American football. He's a free agent, and he used to play. He plays. He last played, I think, in the CFL. There's quite a few Hobbs actually. You got Ellis Hobbs, who plays for. He used to play for the Patriots. You got Jack Hobbs, who was an English cricketer back in the 19 around World War One into the 30s. You've got Anthony Hobbs, who is an American football player, as in soccer player. You've got Nate Hobbs, Zoe Hobbs, Isaiah Hobbs, Jacob Hobbs, Bruce Hobbs. There's quite a few actually. So yeah, there's quite a few Hobbs of both Afro Caribbean, African American origin and European origin who have done and do are pro athletes or have been professional athletes in the past. Not as many as I thought, but quite a few. And some are still active, some have retired, but that's an interesting one. it never ceases to amaze me. I mean, my surname's Curran, so I've got the Curran brothers, Ben, Sam, and uh, ah, the other one who play cricket for England. They all went to my old school as well. No relation, no relation on the alumni board. But the three Curran brothers who play cricket for England went to the same school as me, but they're from Zimbabwe originally. Their daddies play for Zimbabwe. There's Craig Curran, football player, who's played the majority of his career in Scottish football. He did play for Tranmere at one point. Who's related to Stephen Gerrard's other half. Stephen Gerrard's wife. Um, but no, there's some interesting one. There's quite a few Gerrards who played both for Liverpool and Everton, ironically enough. The Rooneys, you've got more than one Rooney brother. Wayne Rooney's obviously the most famous, but he's got two younger brothers as well, who are also pro football players at the lower levels. There's some really interesting family connections and things like that, and sporting dynasties like the Sutter family in ice hockey, for example. So it's an interesting question, like you know, surnames, but there are a few Hobbs. They're just not what I would call household names, I suppose. But it is what it is. Did it fire up as a kid when you found out one of your favourite players had the same birthday as me? Not really. Not really. It didn't overly bother me that a favourite player or any sportsman had or woman had the same birthday as me. Really, that's not what really got me into liking a certain player or a certain athlete in a certain sport. The attributes I look for are hard work, passion, energy, uh, um, teamwork, especially in team sports. Obviously, individual sports is different, but that kind of passion, that energy, work ethic, um, being a team player. You don't have to be the most skillful. I prefer those players that really just put 110% um, in, week out for in their particular sport over the skill guys or the what I call the lazy players. So if I'm looking at a team, if there's what I call the team balance, if you've got a lot of these hard-working individuals who just put everything out there, they're not the most skillful, but without those guys, there's a lack of energy in the locker room. There's a lack of energy on the field. There's a lack of energy within the team. But if you take certain players out of the team dynamic and the team looks a bit flat, you can tell who are the character guys. They're the type of players in a lineup that I look to, and they're sort of actually generally my favourite players. Those unsung heroes generally are my favourite players um, because they bring more to a team than just skill or leadership. They are the unsung leaders, I suppose. They may not be the captain or the vice captain, but they're real leaders because they lead by example, by training hard. Working in the community. Unsung, those kind of unsung heroes. You take them out of the team falls flat. I've always had this theory: you can have a team full of superstars, but they normally work as individuals. Whereas if you have a team of hard workers with a few skill players in there or a few superstars in there, that generally gets you over the line. You need those kind of characters. You need those kind of off-field leaders, those dressing room leaders, those community kind of leaders as well. Um, they're they're the unsung heroes. Without them, you don't have your Conor McDavids or your Sidney Crosby's, getting all in the NHL, or your Johnny Wilkinsons for England, or your Jonah Lomus for the All Blacks, or your Brian Habanas for the Springboks, or your Campeses and your Darren Lockyers and Cameron. Well, Cameron Smith was a hard worker, but your Billy Slaters. Without the hard-working grunts, as I call it, um, you don't have a successful team. And then the general players that I look at, those who are really committed to their craft. They're not the best paid. They're not the superstars. They're not the posters on every kid's wall. They're not the ones that the fans want all the autographs with. They are the unsung heroes. They get forgotten about when we name a team of the year or a team of the decade or a team of the month, player of the month awards. They're the ones that generally get overlooked. Without them, team sports, it's just a bunch of individuals running around without any real guidance, which is, you could say, is all six of the Six Nations. If you take certain players out of those teams, they are just a bunch of individuals, no real leadership. Um, and those kind of character guys, they're the ones that I sort of resonate with as a fan. Um, quite honestly, the unsung heroes, so to speak. Um, Sometimes I do know what the score is going to be. Sometimes I don't. I haven't really been following the NHL the last month or so since the resumption of play. I've sort of zoned out. The Jets aren't making playoffs unless we win every, go on a lengthy run. I think this season's a write-off. We're not the worst team in the division. We're not the best. Um, there are a lot of teams worse than us. We're sort of in a transition phase. The coach has gone. Lowry's now the coach. Maurice has gone. Uh, I'm surprised how bad the Canadians have been this season, though. I really am. So when I'm watching a match replay with the Canadians, I know they're going to lose. Even if I haven't seen the score, they have been dreadful, absolutely dreadful. They've only won 8 games all season. Everyone thought the Arizona Coyotes were going to have the worst season on record. I think the Canadians in the salary cap era are going, hold on here, hold on, Molson. We're going to do that and be the worst team post salary cap lockout 0405 that I think we've ever seen. How that team made a Stanley Cup final last year, I know it was a disrupted season and it was, they went on a playoff run. They weren't the best team in the division and all that, and they snuck into the playoffs. But I think Martin St. Louis, his interim coach, he hasn't got it on a permanent basis. The obsession with Montreal with having you've got to be a French, Canadian or a French speaker as a GM and as a coach, I think is holding the team back. Most of the team don't speak French as a first or second language. Um, I think that is an outdated idea, which is hindering the team going forwards. You know, there's the Carey Price contract is now really the red herring in the room. I feel sorry for Jake Allen in net having to face a firing squad every night. The other three goaltenders they've used this season are all RFA or UFA in the summer. So they've got issues in net because if Jake Allen goes down hurt, that team is not getting any wins. It's as simple as that. Carey Price, no date slated for his return. They're probably going to shut him down for the season now. No need to risk it. They're bottom of the league by some distance. Arizona are a far superior team, and they're selling their assets to get picks. And that tells you something. Arizona are knowing they're not the worst team, but they're the second. Arizona could actually finish as high as fifth in the draft, as in they could actually play themselves into a bit of form and go up the overall standings. But they're trading for draft picks. It doesn't matter if they get first overall or not. Montreal literally are in a shambles. Marty St. Louis, he's got a job on his hands, even as interim, just to instill some confidence in the side. They're going to have to trade pieces before the deadline. He's interim coach though, so how much input does he have on trades and trading for picks and trading for players and all that? They're in a cap situation. The Carey Price contract has aged badly from the day it was signed, and that's going to be just a lead weight around their necks until either they can trade him, which is not going to happen, or his injury record. And if they do trade him, it's going to be a cap dump on a team like an Arizona or a Seattle who's got a lot of cap space. And even then, he might get waived because he's got to prove that he's able to play again. Yes, he's had some personal issues. He's had a lot of injuries. I think it's a difficult with Marty St. Louis. I mean, he's won it as a player, won the Stanley Cup as a player, and there is no doubt that he's played with some of the best players of the modern era. He's a playoff performer. He knows how to win as a player. As a coach, I think he's been thrown in the deep end here. I have no idea how this team made the playoffs, let alone the Stanley Cup final last year. And you could say, oh, but the division only play and then playoffs. So playing in a bubble in Canada, playing against the Canadian teams, you know, fine. But every other team had to be stuck in that, division bubble, not playing any interconference games, nothing like that. Um, and other teams, have either kicked on or maybe having a little bit of a down season, but something has gone horribly, horribly wrong within that organisation. Because you look at the last 6, 7 seasons, they have missed the playoffs more than once, but they've never been this bad. But this is a long-term decline, a long-term decline. And last year was literally a one-off. That's the difference. There is something seriously wrong within the structures of the team behind the scenes. To be honest, I think most Montreal fans don't care if the GM or the coach speak French. I really don't think they care. It's an obsession by the media. It's this unwritten rule, and Patrick Roy is right. You're not going to win another Stanley Cup with the obsession, the outdated obsession with you've got to be a French Canadian or a French speaker to coach and manage this team. Um, it's hurting rather than helping them. They're not going to win anything. I use the Athletic Bilbao example where they've got to be Basque or Basque related to get inside. Um, While I understand the historical aspect of that selection policy and youth policy and transfer policy, what have Bilbao won recently? And it was the same with Barcelona for many years until the 80s. What, you know, and I think long term, it's a global sport now. It's sport is global now. And well, yes, they are one of the original six. They've got some of the biggest revenues. They're a globally recognised brand. Um, there are issues within the structures of the team. I think if you didn't have a French speaker, it didn't matter. I don't think it would matter as long as they brought success. Um, quite honestly, um, but that's my opinion on that one. I haven't even touched on the Major League Baseball lockout. As far as I know, there's been no further progress in ending the trade dispute between the players and the owners. Just have a quick look at how that's progressing. I know talks broke down recently. Let's have a look at what's happening with the lockout because spring training is meant to have started. This is interesting. Let's have a look. So yesterday, I agree with that. On Saturday, so yesterday, the Major League Baseball gave the players a 130-page proposal. Well, this is interesting. The most sweeping one made since December the 2nd. That included adjustments on several core economic issues, but ultimately left union officials underwhelmed, according to sources, with no other bargaining session immediately scheduled and both sides believing there is still a lot of ground to bridge. This is effectively ensures pitchers and catchers will not report to spring training this week as scheduled. So, yeah, spring training is going to start late, basically. There's lots of stuff in it economically that blows my mind because some of the numbers being discussed, over 200 million for the luxury tax balance. We're talking big numbers here, which is the value of some of the teams, ironically. Crazy numbers being thrown around. But basically, it looks like spring training is not going to start on time, which could mean the season doesn't start on time. So I think the longer this goes on, the more likely the lockout continues, and we could see a season partially lost or completely lost. This is the longest lockout in Major League Baseball history, so it's already breaking records as each minute passes. So, and I can't see any agreement being reached before the end of the month. So that's Major League Baseball in a nutshell. The best Premier League midfielders are David Ginola, Vieira. Skulls for his passing, not his tackling. Two-guy. Um, Vladimir Smeets, who's underrated. I honestly believe that. If you're a Liverpool fan, and remember Vladimir Smeets, a very underrated midfielder. Um, you've got so many in there. I think the late 90s to mid 2000s, I think, was the best period. I think for midfield, like the Flitcroft. is another one. Um, so many players in there. Nobby Solano is one who gets regularly overlooked. You have Kanchelskis, more of a striker midfielder, but you could put him in that kind of creative bracket. Marian Pajas is another one. Bolo Zenden was a midfielder, played at Chelsea and Middlesbrough. So many. But I think the mid '90s to the mid 2000s is when I think the Premier League, for me as a product, was at its best. But that's personal opinion. Yes, and as a Blackburn fan, I would also say too, Guy. So underrated, so underrated. 2-footed. Uh, him and Stephen Reid, that was a midfield. But I would definitely say that there's a lot of underrated players from that era, like Nicky Butt. Not only did he play for Man United, he also played for Newcastle and was a very very solid performer for many seasons. Gets overlooked a lot because players like David Beckham, your Patrick Vieira's, steal the limelight. But you've got Didier Deschamps played for Chelsea for a little bit. You had Vialli in there. You had Emmanuel Petit, Chelsea and Arsenal. You had Ray Parlour. Uh, so some really good players that get overlooked because they weren't the most skillful, they weren't the most flashy, um, not all the step overs. Um, we did have some good players. We did have some good players. Morton Gams Pedersen, just because he scored one of the best goals in the Premier League era, I honestly think, and had one of the worst dives in the Premier League era. Andre Arshavin as a sort of a winger. You could play him in a midfield role. Janino from Middlesbrough. There's quite a few in there. And then you've got players like Lee Cattermole who just broke legs. But you need that kind of spite in your team. Paolo Di Canio, another one. Just so many to name. But as I say, like I would say I'll put Robbie Savage as a defensive midfielder in there as well. Lee Hendry for Villa had some good spells as a Villa player. Some really good players in there, and it's it's a difficult one to go. The best. The best because you've had 30 years, 30 seasons as of next season. To look back on that's 3 decades of players. Tony Cottee, Steve Claridge. Yep, Tim Sherwood. He was decent. I wouldn't say he was the best, but he was solid. Again, Blackburn player. We have also a link with Tottenham in there for some reason. We seem to trade players with Tottenham on a frequent basis. But no, you've got 30 years of choices to go from. Really, 7 different clubs have won the Premier League in 30 years. So it's you've got a big sample size, and the game has evolved, and the league has actually shrunk from where it was in '92. It was a bigger league. You had to play more league games, so they've restructured the league format. It was actually harder to win the Premier League in the first 4 or 5 seasons than the next 25. You had more games to play. Bearing in mind, you still had FA Cup final replays in the first couple of seasons of the Premier League's existence. So those are things to bear in mind. Um, so yeah, the style of play has changed. The quality of pitches has changed. The speed of the game, the style of the game, the roles that players play. Because some teams do play with sweepers. That's sort of gone. You're now relying on the keeper to do some crazy antics rather than a stay-at-home defender who would just come up the corners and free kicks, who would take pressure off the goalkeeper. And then you've got players like Steve Bold and Vinnie Jones and Dennis Wise, whose job was literally to kick lumps out of you. You don't have that anymore. You don't have that destructive midfielder whose job is quite literally to rough up the opposition. That kind of play is gone. Those energy guys have gone. I think football's gone really soft in that regard. But then you have like players like Claude Makelele who have a position. The Makelele is now sort of a term to name a player a position after a player, a role after a player, the Makalele role. You've got N'Golo Kante, I think, is the closest defensive midfielder you're going to get to a Steve Bold or a Claude Makalele or Gilberto Silva type player who can score goals, but his primary job is to break up the play. And in years past, that'd be like a Vinnie Jones or a Steve Bold, who would also try and break your leg and really get stuck in and leave his mark on an opposition play. You don't really have that anymore. But we've had so many great players have graced the midfield kind of role. I wouldn't say Drogba is the most clutch Premier League player. He popped up for some big goals and some big games and some big finals, but I wouldn't say Drogba is clutch. I think he was consistent. I think there are other. I think he got players like Matty Jansen, for example, or Robbie Keane, another one. He would pop up and score a hatful of goals and then go quiet for a period and score a hatful of goals. Drogba was a leader though of that Chelsea side, but he was so consistent for such a long period of time. I wouldn't say Drogba was the most clutch Premier League player. I think Italy in the second half were the better side, if I'm being brutally honest. I think the scoreline flattered England today. Same problems. It doesn't matter if England win or lose. That the second half performance is just not good enough. It doesn't matter if they're winning the game or they lose the game. Between the minutes of 45, 50 minutes, and 60 minutes onwards, their play deteriorates, their discipline deteriorates, their intensity disappears. Their discipline, the penalty count goes up, the error count goes up. They start getting dominated in certain areas. So, regardless of the result, I think it flatters England. It's the first time England have ever held Italy to 0 points in a Test match. And looking at the under-20s, I think Italy have more prospects coming through than England, who are playing at a higher level in the sense of higher performance level, because they didn't play their best and they beat them, and they held them to 0. So for the first time ever. So it's a difficult one. I think England got a lot of problems that are being sort of papered over because they're saying, "Oh, we've got injuries or we're blooding some new players," but the same issues persist. It doesn't matter who's in that England lineup. This is a long-term trend with England over many, many years. This hasn't happened overnight. This isn't an Eddie Jones problem or a Martin Johnson problem in years past. This is a situation where, or Stuart Lancaster or Ashton or even Sir Clive Woodward, towards the end of his time in charge, so just after the 2003 World Cup, there were cracks appearing in England in regards to penalty count, discipline, intensity, focus, silly errors, silly penalties. There were things starting to creep in as far back as 2004 to 2005. Bad habits were creeping in and have consistently been there for 16, 17 years. There's things that need addressing, and it's to do, I think, with to a certain extent, the culture of things, and also because those bad habits have got in there. When you introduce new players constantly, there's players from the previous regime or the previous test camp that have been there for X amount of years that have also got those bad habits sort of ingrained in their play, and it just you bring a new player in, and then they pick up those bad habits, and they become the experienced player or the leader in the squad, and then another new player comes in or a debutant comes in, and so the virus continues. So there needs to be some. I don't know how you do it. I think it's an issue with the English game, if I'm quite honest, the club game as well. Those bad habits have also crept into the English domestic game as well. Is something that I've noticed when I do get the chance to watch club rugby. Those bad habits have not only got into the test side, but also the club sides as well. So that's something to think about and ponder. The best home nation, I'm going to say Ireland, even though they lost narrowly to France in the end. I think France and Ireland are a step above the rest as the Northern Hemisphere nations. I wouldn't say home nations. In the Six Nations, France and Ireland are your top two, as things currently stand, and by some distance. I think France are clear favourites, Ireland second favourites, um, by, yeah, as I say, some distance. There is a clear gap now appearing between those two nations on a consistent level, not because Wales won last year. It's a consistency, always, being consistent. France have completely changed their philosophy. They've gone back in a time machine, it seems, 20 years, and they've resurrected the game plan from 20 years ago, and that's the best France have played consistently for a couple of seasons now with that style. And Ireland, outside of World Cups where they just reach the quarterfinals and then hit a brick wall, they still be consistent. So they're the two of the Northern Hemisphere powerhouses that there's a clear separation. I would regularly expect France and Ireland to regularly give the All Blacks a game, and a fierce contest now regularly, where the All Blacks aren't overwhelming favourites; they're narrow favourites. So, and same with the Springboks as well. France and Ireland, I think, can go toe to toe with those two big Southern Hemisphere powerhouses on a quite regular basis. So I think that's the difference now between where we were 15 years ago and where we are now. Scotland, they're still so Jekyll and Hyde. They're still so good one week, bad the next. They do good things one week, bad things the next week. So, and while their defence have massively improved, they're not scoring enough tries. And for the attacking ability they have, that's a concern. Wales, yes, they've got a lot of injuries, but I'm not sure that their style of play suits some of the rule changes that have been brought in, or the law changes, if we say, if we're being pedantic about things. They grind out results, but they're not playing an aggressive attacking style. They're playing more of an aggressive defensive style. And while that's worked well for many, many years, it's not entertaining to watch Wales play. And Welsh fans hate me, but I hate them, so it's fine. I have an ongoing running battle on this channel with Welsh Rugby Union fans because they really are a toxic bunch. Just gonna put it out there. Because they don't support their domestic club sides, but then they suddenly support the national side, and they wonder why the domestic club game has got no money. Who would have thought? But Wales' style, I think, what is also striking is they've gone with the Southern Hemisphere coach constantly for the best part of 20 years. Are there no good Welsh coaches to coach, the senior side? Just give me something here. But it is the global game now. But I think, that's something to consider. Is the Welsh style is not. They've got some destructive ball runners. They've got some skillful outside backs, given the chance and space, and they play this very conservative style. That, well, yeah, they like the arm wrestle. They like the scrappy game, which is why they had the roof open, I believe, in Scotland. They wanted to take Scotland's attacking threat away from them, and they did that. They sucked them into an arm wrestle, which Scotland are not suited to at all. As England were proving for the first 60 minutes, the arm wrestle, Scotland didn't like it. So that's a way to mitigate things. If Wales can suck you into an arm wrestle, they will have a good chance of winning the game. If you can avoid the arm wrestle and keep your flow, like, quick ruck speed, quicker line outs, keep the ball moving quickly, you're going to beat Wales. If you allow yourself to get stuck in that arm wrestle, you're more likely to lose. That's what Wales try and do. They try and suck you into the arm wrestle. So if the weather conditions are like this, prolonged into February, into March, with changeable wet weather, possibly snow, grotty weather, basically cold, wet, blustery, Wales will love that because it means it's a very broken up match, no real flow to it, and they can get you with that arm wrestle, and that's what they want. But they are missing so many key players, and they've got so many injury concerns that they're forced to sort of play that way. But Wayne Pivac, his first period, the first part before the World Cup, question marks with their low win percentage. It wasn't going well. Then they win the Six Nations last year, and people go, okay, the question marks have gone. Now the questions go away. And then iffy autumn, poor first showing against Ireland, a scrappy game against Scotland. Well, I think they wanted the scrappy game. They weren't convincing. as in, they were better because they brought Scotland into an arm wrestle. If they have the roof shut and Scotland are allowed to play their running game, Wales get blown off the field. But they'd worked out, well, okay, we've got bad weather, we'll open the roof. And it worked in their favour. Scotland don't like the arm wrestle. That's why it was such a tight, scrappy game against England as well. Scotland don't like the arm wrestle. They want to keep it fast moving, fast paced, move the opposition around, always thinking aggressively. So there you go. Italy showed some promising signs, just little errors, coach killers, but they are showing real positive green shoots. They were also trying to move the ball quickly, and their handling skills actually in the loose when they were trying to build momentum were actually really, they were happy to attack, run from deep, and they've got some dangerous ball runners, and they were willing to throw the ball around, and they were willing to chance their arm. So again, if you've got a team like Wales that want to play a conservative arm wrestle style, and you play like that constantly, and you don't want to get sucked into the arm wrestle, Wales will struggle with the players they're missing. France, though, I think they're a step above. Ireland, okay, that Ireland France game could have gone either way. That was one of the best games I've seen for a very, very long time. Very long time. Really entertaining. Really thoroughly enjoyed it. Ireland proved without Sexton, you can still play. They have been forced to play a different style. It actually suits the players they've got. I think there is life after Johnny Sexton. So that'd be interesting. Do I think the Rugby League World Cup being moved to 2022 will help benefit teams? Yes. I think it will. I honestly think it will. There's some good young talent coming through in the NRL. There is some real good young talent coming through the NRL. We've seen some key players for both Australia and New Zealand retire last season. So some of these younger players that are coming in to fill that void get that opportunity to get another full season under their belts. So there's some good young British talent playing in the NRL as well. I think it will benefit every team having that extra year preparation as well. Coaches can really formulate their game plans a little bit more. They've got that extra year preparation time. And with players like Boyd Cordner and Jake Friend, for example, the Roosters retiring, and that leaves a sort of a leadership void for the Australian side, which they need to fill. So yeah, I think so. But we'll see. I think it's going to be a very interesting tournament. I think because of those players and other players like Benji Marshall also retiring. There's some big names who would have actually played had the World Cup been played last year. Benji Marshall, that would have been his send off. I have no doubt that the Kiwis would have selected him. No doubt in my mind. He would have been selected as this is your farewell. Your last game is your last game, whether it's a final, a semi-final, go out on a high. And they decided to postpone a year, and obviously he's gone that the body can't take it anymore and retiring. I'd have loved to see Benji Marshall at one more World Cup. It just sadly wasn't to be. That's the crux of it. Do I think Newcastle? Yeah, I think they can. I think they can. I also think Norwich can possibly get out of trouble. I think Everton and Leeds are looking precarious, and I think Brentford are starting to tumble a little bit as well. So there's some teams above them whose form is worse. And I think Norwich have, while they've not had as much of a turnaround, they're also in a far better position than before Dean Smith took over. So there's a couple of teams down there that around Newcastle that are playing worse than them, and they are in a position to overtake some. So yes. As for Six Nations expansion, no, leave the Springboks in the Rugby Championship. They're a Southern Hemisphere nation. I know Super Rugby has sort of reformatted itself and changed, but leave the Springboks as a Southern Hemisphere nation. I mean, it wasn't that long ago they were considering admitting Canada to the Six Nations. For that turned out for the Canadians not going to the World Cup, and the US as well. The US haven't qualified for the World Cup yet. So, and while they're saying while they were saying, "Oh, we should get Georgia in," the Italians have never lost to Georgia. So if you've got that playoff, they're going to win every time. And quite frankly, I mean, can you see some of these European fans going to Tbilisi on a cold, late winter, early spring morning when there's a chance it's going to bloody snow? Uh, I can't see that happening. But there was also calls back in the early 2000s to bring Romania into the Six Nations as well because they've got a very solid domestic league and very solid professional program at second tier level status. So I think be careful what you wish for. When they say, "Oh, relegate Italy out of it," in years past, that could have been Scotland, that could have been Wales, that could have been Ireland, could have been France. Can you imagine that? And it took many years for the French to actually win anything in what was the old Five Nations format. So be careful what you wish for in that regard. You know, yeah. And the Italians, their players play in the top leagues in Europe. Let's not kid ourselves. Look how good Benetton Treviso are. They are a really good outfit in the United Rugby Championship. They're beating up some of the South African teams with ease. So let's not kid ourselves that the Italians should be kicked out. There are issues with the test side. There is no doubt on that. At club level, I mean, Zebra are having a shocking season this year, but in previous seasons they've been pretty competitive, and so you've got to be careful what you wish for. And for many years, Ireland struggled at World Cups. They still do. And Ireland at some points have had the wooden spoon. So you've got to be really careful. Scotland have had the wooden spoon a lot of times as well. But Scotland is only the last couple of years under Gregor Townsend they're actually decent again. So if you're arguing for that relegation kind of thing, be careful what you wish for because one year it will come in. It'll be a team like a France or an Ireland who are at the bottom because every team goes through these cyclical cycles. Because before Italy joined the Six Nations, they were beating everyone around them in Tier 2 level status, so which is what they got in. And the first couple of years of the Six Nations, they were beating Scotland and Wales regularly. So and Scotland and Wales were below them in the final table. So if you want to go down that route of the bottom team should play off against the next team below, you've got to be very, very careful. Relegate a team out. You've got to be very, very careful. And look what the struggles Argentina had to get into the Rugby Championship. No one's saying they should be kicked out of the Rugby Championship. It took them 20 years to get there. Yeah, South Africa, that's an interesting one as well. It's an interesting one, but they've got the agreement with the San-Azar and all that for the Rugby Championship. What was the Tri Nations? And the rivalry in the Southern Hemisphere, it's against Australia and New Zealand and Argentina. You take that out, you ruin that weakened product. It's already a weakened product anyway. You weaken it further. You really do. I understand for time zone, it works rather well, but you've got to remember our winter is their summer. So can you imagine playing games in the South African heat of the high veld summer? Players would be dropping. I will tell you that now. I've got friends from like Namibia, Botswana, South Africa, Zimbabwe. Are you seriously like suggesting that you play high intensity internationals in the heat of a savannah African summer up in the high veld in Joburg because you are asking players to die of heat exhaustion? There's a reason why they tour us in our winter in like November, December. There is a reason why they play their rugby championship in our summer, their winter. It's to keep the players alive. Same with Australia. That would be ridiculous. The Justin Langer situation. Look, he's won the Ashes. He's won the T20 World Cup, and he has to stay. He doesn't want to extend his contract, which says to me that there are issues within Cricket Australia that haven't been resolved for many years. You, um, Fiji should not be in the Rugby Championship. I think they used to have a Pacific Nations Championship years ago, which the US and Canada were part of, and Japan. That's gone now. They've got some great players, but to get together as a team and get that discipline, they're still a tier 2 nation status. They're same with Tonga, tier 2 nation status. Their best players get pinched by the All Blacks and the Wallabies anyway, and the finances are just not there. Their best players play in Europe or or in Super Rugby anyway. The finances aren't there. Samoa, look at Samoa. They used to be a powerhouse in the amateur days in regards to being the best Pacific nation. They've got no money. And there are calls in rugby league as well to have a professional kind of franchise in the NRL. Really? Really? Um, in regards to Justin Langer potentially taking the England job, what what I don't understand is why the ECB are trying to copy Cricket Australia's structures. Um, we've got a bigger domestic game, more registered players, more professional teams. Doesn't work. The centralised contracts don't work. The TV deal don't work. The 100 format don't work. The mess they've made of the T20 county format don't work. The ECB needs massive structural change. Um, and why Justin Langer didn't want to extend says to me that there are bigger issues within Cricket Australia than we realise. He had to his captain gets basically sacked before the Ashes in regards to an old scandal that Cricket Australia cleared him of, but then new evidence emerged. He steps down. This is following on from the ball tampering scandal and the culture issues within that dressing room and how it brought the sport to disrepute. And in Australia, much like it is here, it's seen as the gentleman's game. Doesn't matter if you're working class or upper class or middle class. It's seen as doesn't matter what your background is. If you play cricket, you play in a certain manner that is acceptable. And the fact that there is so much scandal around cricket now, with player misbehaviour, allegations of racism, homophobia, sexism, bullying, it does make you wonder the culture of the sport. You know, corruption scandals. It does make you wonder because the way that the sport is held in high regard. You have to talk to any Australian. The way that cricket is seen as completely different to any other sport is it is seen as a gentlemanly game. Um, and I'll get to the Zuma situation and his brother. Both Zuma brothers are in trouble because Dagenham and Redbridge have suspended his younger brother as well because he's also in the video. So both Zuma brothers. The French courts can actually prosecute even if they're overseas. So they can be called back to France to face prosecution because it's in the French penal code that if you commit offence overseas, you can actually be prosecuted for it, for one. They can be prosecuted here for animal cruelty, for two, and that comes with a lengthy sentence. And both have been suspended by their clubs. Both Zuma brothers have both been suspended by their teams, and they both play in East London. Well, one for West Ham, one for Dagenham and Redbridge. So I'm surprised both of them haven't had more punishment. Mason Greenwood as well. That hasn't gone away. Nike have completely torn up their sponsorship contract with him. So whether they've been liaising with their lawyers in regards to this, it's going to be interesting to see what happens. But both Dagenham and Redbridge with his younger brother and West Ham have basically he was meant to be in the West Ham lineup for the game this weekend and was dropped at the last minute. I I don't know what it is with football, but this is like Man United have got the Mason Greenwood scandal, and West Ham and Dagenham and Redbridge have got the Zuma scandal, as I call it, because both brothers are professionals. They're both on the books of these clubs, and they've both been suspended. I wouldn't be surprised if there is a criminal case brought against them as well. So that's not good look. Football this season, and football in the last couple of years, it's not a good look. It doesn't matter any kind of abuse. So Ryan Giggs, technically, is still Wales manager. He is just suspended until he is sentenced. They haven't technically sacked him from the Wales job, but that's not looking good for him. Domestic violence. Obviously, Gylfi Sigurdsson. It's gone a bit quiet on Gylfi Sigurdsson. He hasn't played all season. Those allegations are quite serious against Gylfi Sigurdsson. Whether they're true or not is another thing. But so that's an issue. Obviously, Mason Greenwood. He's on police bail. He's been arrested twice in the space of a week, basically, whilst still in police custody. So they extended his custody. He's in serious trouble. The Zuma brothers, animal abuse. An unnamed player at Brighton. I think the case was dropped there. You got Mendy for Man City. This is like this kind of entitlement, and these are not isolated incidents. They didn't become violent towards women or their pets overnight, animals overnight. They didn't just develop this kind of attitude. This is an attitude of entitlement and an attitude of being like basically, you know, in a bubble. They can't do any wrong. Um, and something has gone very, very wrong within the culture of the sport. But I do believe these issues are much longer standing than and much more widespread than I think the sport would like to admit. We've seen players, we've seen, you know, there's definitely a culture issue within the fan base of football and the playing group and the club side of things behind the scenes. And it starts at the top. It starts at the top of any organisation, and that has to go as high as the FA then, as the governing body in this country. I'm not looking further afield at other scandals because you've got players like Robinho, for example, who's been charged in absentia and is technically a fugitive. Um, but let's go with the FA and the Premier League and the Football League and the non-league because there's been issues in the non-league as well. There's been issues in Scotland with Good Willie, for example, found not guilty in a criminal case, but in a civil case, he's got to pay damages for some unsavoury acts. Let's just have a look at this, right? Now, that says to me, toxic culture starts at the top. It doesn't start at the bottom, it starts at the top. So if there's things getting people in the governance side and in club management side that are getting away with bad behaviour, that toxic rot goes all the way through down to youth level, grassroots level. It does. So, and we saw this with the Mark Sampson case, which actually was the first video on this channel to get triple digit views on a video when he got sacked as England women's manager. After that incident, be it the bullying or the racism or the sex, or technically got sacked for having a relationship with one of his players at club level before he went into the national side. And while it was a consensual relationship, there's actually a code of conduct in place saying you can't have a relationship between a coach and a player because it's a safeguarding issue apparently. But even if they are consenting adults, which I think they need to look at that a little bit because but I think the scandals are worse in football because it happens off the field. In my opinion, I think that in my opinion means that I think they're worse. I'll get back to the Ponting, Lee, Warne, Simmons era. Simmons wasn't the best player. There was a lot of baggage with Simmons, but Ponting and Brett Lee, brilliant. Shane Warne, bit of scandal with him. Brilliant, one of the best spinners ever, and a good lower middle order batsman, but still a fair bit off the field with Shane Warne. In regards to a culture issue, the NRL has a lot of it as well, and I think again that comes from the top. It comes from weak punishments handed down, inconsistent punishments handed down. The Blackhawks, that all came out last summer, so yes, the league were aware of it, but the cover-up, I think, is quite concerning. How the NHL, were aware of a lot of the allegations, and the team were as well. And we've seen a lot of heads roll for that. And as a Jets fan with Sheville Dayoff, who was part of that management of the team, while he was one of the few people who fought Carl Beach's corner, he still could have gone, right, I'm still not happy with this. And I, in my opinion, don't think he did enough. But whether he's still GM of the Jets at the end of this season is another thing, because on the ice we are not doing well this season. In regards to the cricket question, I'll go back to Ponting. Great player, but his record of Australian captain in the Ashes, the worst Australian captain in the Ashes. However, overall, good win percentage, good batsman, good leader. I like Ricky Ponting a lot. I actually do. I like Jason Gillespie as well. I think he could be the future England coach should they be able to pry him away from his county side, because he sort of he's an adopted son of England, even though he was our rival in the Ashes. I like Jason Gillespie. He's in my cricketing all-time 11 as well, by the way. That is an older video on the channel, the cricket playlist. Check it out. Um, the NRL, yeah, has a lot of scandal. The last couple of seasons with some of the COVID breaches, and that while they're not as severe as the Jared Hayne situation, in my opinion, or the Russell Packer kind of off-field dramas where there were criminal convictions for some rather unsavoury acts, and I think Russell Packer was lucky to play again, in my opinion. Um, they're not as bad scandals as some, but there's a lot of off-field misbehaviour with NRL players and Super League players. Zach Hardacre keeps springing up in my mind because I've done a lot of videos on him with his misdeeds and keep getting chances and chances. These are role models for kids. Come on, but when you have these kind of players, Miss Baker, or club execs at the mid range club executives like Cronulla Sharks with their scandals as well, a lot of it comes from the top. Bad culture starts at the top and it works its way down. That's a given. And you could argue that there is an issue with a drink culture within rugby league and a drug culture within rugby league. No doubt on that at all. I think yes, that kind of culture, I think, is more widespread within professional sport, and I think professional sport likes to acknowledge. Recreational drug use is, I think, far more widespread than they would like to acknowledge. The testing regime for recreationals, some sports they test twice a year, pre-season and once in regular season. That's it. That's it. So make of that what you will. Make of that what you will. That's why the steroid scandal in baseball managed to, that steroid use in baseball was going on for so long. And we as sports fans sort of knew that how many home runs they hit in here. Like, how bulky is that player compared to 2 years ago? I mean, there's gym work and then there's gym work. So, yeah, toxic culture happens at the top. And yeah, that is amazing. They won't. A lot of the drugs tests are actually checking for specific substances. And some recreational drugs stay in your system for a few hours. Some, like marijuana, easy to detect. MDMA, which is what he had a major issue with, and speed, it's in and out. In and out quite quick. And yeah, he admitted he had personal issues off the field. And he got caught in possession of MDMA in London, ecstasy in London. I think, when was it? It was before one of the World Cups, or one of the Aussie tours. And obviously it's post playing, so he was doing some commentary and some coaching. And yeah, he was, as a tourist, basically, he got caught in possession of MDMA, and not a large amount, mind, but he got caught in possession. And like, yeah, he's still one of the most intelligent analysts of the game and one of the best coaches in the game for young players. And he's even admitted now he's sober. Obviously, we know this, but he's still not on the same level as Ben Cousins in the AFL. Not even on the same level. Because he's still managed to actually post retirement actually be actively involved not only in the sport but in the media, actively hold down an income, actively be active in the community, raising awareness of mental health issues and drug addiction issues and epilepsy. So while he's a flawed character, undoubtedly a flawed character, I still think he's nowhere near as bad as Ben Cousins in the AFL, who never actually failed a drugs test, by the way. Never failed a drugs test. The AFL basically tried to ban him twice and failed twice because he came back. I've watched the 2 documentaries on Ben Cousins and it makes you cry. It honestly does. It honestly makes you cry because he actually says at the beginning of both documentaries, if I can actually help save a life, I've done something good. But Ben Cousins, Christ, you just have to. That made national news over here in the UK. An AFL player made news over here in the UK with what was going on with him. It was that big a story because he was the best AFL player at the time. And he was falling apart. And Andrew Johns is nowhere close to Ben Cousins. No, not even close. But Andrew Johns has admitted to mental health and drug issues. He's sober now. That is the key difference. Um, where other players, past and present, Paul Merson, for example, regularly gets slated on social media, just destroyed on social media. And there's a reason why, not just professional athletes, but especially men, don't talk about their mental health ever. Like suicide is the biggest cause of death for men under the age of 40. It kills more people than cancer, more people than heart attacks. Mental health is a bigger killer as a contributory factor to a young man's death than any other health condition. You can add on top of that the addiction side of things. But for my age group, and someone who suffers with mental health, and I hold my hand up, and I'm brave enough to talk about it, an addiction, I'm brave enough to talk about it, is the biggest killer for men under the age of 40. Um, and you take young men and you put them in a higher pressure situation where there's cameras on them all the time, press intrusion, a lot of high pressure situations, and yeah, you throw the big money at them, which don't help. Um, yeah, it's a powder keg waiting to go off and explode. Um, so when we're looking at a lot of these situations, yeah, some of the like the Jared Haynes situation, the Mason Greenwood situation. Now Mason Greenwood is on bail at the moment, but he could be facing longer inside than Jared Haynes in Australia. Very serious allegations against Mason Greenwood. I don't think because of his price tag and how much he earns, you escape justice. Now, it, it's the questions are really interesting. Don't get me wrong. I'm really interested in the questions. What do I think of the Edmonton Oilers? They've well, Connor McDavid is overrated. Drysaitl's the better player. I feel sorry for Koskinen in net because he's been thrown under the bus by the coach. It's not just Koskinen who's at fault. I think the team is falling apart very, very quickly in regards to their form from where they were at the beginning of the season. It was unsustainable, the numbers they were putting up. And they're not going to win a Stanley Cup anytime soon. That's my opinion on that one. Ben Cousins, feel sorry for him. He's a West Coast, that drug party, biker gangs, AFL Eagles talk about cover up. They know. Yeah, well, I've watched the documentaries. I've done a lot of research on the Ben Cousins situation. I do feel a little bit sorry for him, but the warning signs were there very early on in his career that there was issues off the field. His family were trying to make the team aware that we're concerned about. He's a young guy, a lot of money, he's struggling. But we've come a long way since 1996 when he first broke into the league when he was 16 years old. We've come a long way since the mid 90s. Recreational drugs can be a career ender, as Ben Cousins found out. Although his career actually ended with injury, but he had a long spell out where he had to prove he was sober, and he came back for Richmond, and then injury saw him actually retire. But the concerning thing is that the team were aware of it, and yeah, like his friend died of an overdose, teammate. So it wasn't just Ben Cousins who was recreationally abusing drugs and alcohol. Lots of AFL players were doing it. He was just the easy target because of his off-field antics being so public. And this is well before social media blew up. Can you imagine Ben Cousins if he was, that age playing now? He would be banned nearly immediately. Can you imagine what it was like in the 80s? We know what happened in the NHL with the Oilers and the Capitals and the Red Wings with Probert, Grant Fuhr, the whole Capitals team. The alleged, well, we know Grant Fuhr got caught and Bob Probert got caught for cocaine use, but the alleged widespread use of drugs. There was no social media. There was no camera phones. camcorders, very few people could afford a high range camcorder. You're not going to take a big camcorder on a night out, in a bar in Detroit because A, you'll get mugged for it, uh, and B, a lot of people didn't have that kind of disposable income. We now know 30, 40 years later, the toxic culture at the time, in the 80s and the 90s, in the NHL. And it hasn't gone away. It's just less prevalent now than what it was then. Same with rugby league. I mean, the drink culture. You listen to some of the stories about Tommy Raudonikis. Yes, yes, the legendary Tommy Raudonikis, one of my favourite commentators, one of the colourful characters of the game, as a coach, as a player, as a commentator. Sadly, he passed away last year. Heart problems and cancer obviously did for him. But for me, we give too many second and third and fourth and fifth chances. I do believe in three strike policy, but if you have an issue, you get anonymity for a while. Get that rehabilitation. That means you're long term injured reserve. So be it. But they need to look after them better as well. There's a duty of care. If you've got an employee who goes, I need to use the employee welfare program, which I've actually gone down that route and it cost me my job. So I think there needs to be less stigma around, um, you know, mental health and personal issues and addiction problems. I think there needs to be better support and as long as they are passing those tests like you're sober, continue operating as a professional. There's employment assistance programs that should be better advertised. Basically, there's a stigma about using them, and everyone I know, including myself, who's used the employment assistance program has lost their job. So they're not working as advertised because if you openly are using it, oh, I've got a cold as well. I've seen bumblebees around. It's been that warm lately. I've actually seen daffodils sprouting up. We're in mid-February. It should be snowing. So, some of the early spring flowers, yeah, I'm already getting hay fever. It's mid-February. This is not right. I don't think it's a controversial opinion that recreational drug use and doping should be viewed differently. Look, my view is legalise it all. Take it away from the criminals. And regulate, because think of all the tax revenue as well, and the better. Again, Jake Livermore, although there was a lot of mitigating circumstances, and again, the game didn't look after him. The sport did not look after Jake Livermore after his child died. Did not give him the support it should have, and that falls on Hull City, and that falls on the Premier League, and it falls on the FA with Jake Livermore. And that's again, personal opinion there. He wasn't given that support by the players' union. He wasn't given the support by his club, and he wasn't. Well, he was. I think Steve Bruce did stick his neck out for him and say, "Look, we do stand by him." But I think the issues were there before he got suspended, basically, and thrown under the bus. Solid player, not outstanding player. He's a solid player, but I do think he was let down before he got banned. That's a personal opinion there. Um, but I do think we need to have a hard and fair discussion, which is getting harder and harder these days. A more open discussion, because if these guys aren't sports stars, they're probably going to be what I call tradies. They're going to be working as builders, scaffolders, electricians, in sanitation like I do, waste disposal like I do. They're going to be doing working class to lower middle class jobs. So they could be office clerks, they could be, warehouse production line operatives. They're going to be doing hard graft. And everyone I know in these industries, there's a drink and drug culture. You work long hours. The amount of people I knew in the warehouse factory game who had issues with speed and cocaine just to stay awake. They were functioning on Class B and Class A recreationals, not because they enjoyed it, just to get through a 12-hour shift, 5 to 6 days a week. Every builder and scaffolder and tradie I know goes on the piss. If they get paid weekly, they are on Friday, they are bang on it. They are knocking them back. Everyone I know in the trades has got I would say he's got a drink problem, quite frankly. Um, and I've done a bit of demo work and worked in a few like labouring type jobs. And I'll tell you now, yeah, knocking them back. I would knock them back. Back in the day, drink a few too many tinnies. So that kind of working class kind of culture, a lot of pro athletes, the sports originally are working class in origin, or middle class in origin. So there's you still back in the amateur days or in the early professional days, if you didn't make it as a pro, your demographic, your working to middle class demographic, you're knocking as the Aussies say, the schooners back. Or if you're middle class, you go and you have that bottle of wine on a Friday night with the wife for dinner. So there is a drink culture there, and yeah, that working class part, like hard drinking, hard partying culture is there. Um, a lot of people forget that, yeah, pro sports originally started out in the Victorian era, as we'll call it, as working class pastimes, played by the working class for the working class, or to a certain extent played by the middle class for the middle class. But even so, working lower middle class, working class to lower middle class kind of demographic, and yeah, so that culture has always been around some of these sports. Is you play hard, you drink hard, you party hard. That's always been there. As obviously the modern era, as things get more professional, there's more money, bigger salaries, better facilities. They're not just working class lads who are amateurs or semi pros who get picked up by talent scouts. They're in the academies from the age of 10, 11. They've basically been built up from a pre-teen lad all the way up to senior squad. So that they're in school when they get scouted and they end up as a professional. You've sort of lost that link between the fan base and what you are as a professional. However, the link is still there, because if these lads weren't playing these like rugby league, rugby union, even cricket to us, so there's a lot of working class lads who play cricket, football, ice hockey in some countries. If they're not grinding away at the coalface, in the athletic side of things, they're going to be these working class to lower middle class grafters who are either in lower level management positions to working at the bottom end as an apprentice. They're going to be on a building site, in a factory, down a mine, um, you know working in a scrapyard, anything like that. So this is the kind of dynamic. They grow up, they're from working class areas predominantly, some are from middle class, working to middle class areas. So there's always a pub around the corner or a bar or that kind of nightclub thing. There's deprivation around where some of these young lads grow up, so they're kind of used to the hard drinking kind of culture, the rough side of town kind of culture, and they can't leave the working class link with their mates behind, and that so they are put in a very uncomfortable position where like their mates are still working in the factory, working on the building site, working in the timber yard, working in the mines in Australia, for example. You want to talk about the NRL, for example, you know, working in hard grafting jobs, which if they weren't pro athletes, they would be doing themselves. And yeah, there's an element of crime there. So with the Ben Cousins situation, or the Corey Norman, with the photographs with him in a bar with known gang members a couple of years ago, and Tavita Pangai Jr. with the known gang members in a barber shop that got raided by the police. It's very hard to leave that behind. Now, some do it better than others don't. And yeah, we need to have a tough discussion about not just sport but society in general and how the impacts on it. But that's sort of like a bit of a rant. But when I do videos on like sports and recreational drug use and player welfare, no one gives a toss. Hardly anyone watches them, because for whatever reason, until like a Mason Greenwood incident or a Jared Hayne or a Russell Packer or a Grant Fuhr or Bob Probert in the NHL, until an incident like that happens, people go, oh well, they're well paid. Yeah, but they come from gritty working class neighbourhoods. I mean, Grant Fuhr was adopting these mixed race. You couldn't get more woke in modern day standards if you tried. Fostered adopted, mixed race background. So he's already got prejudice at the time he was playing. And he was thrown at the bus by the league and he was the soft target. Yeah. Working class family, you couldn't make it up if you tried. One of the best. Look, there's a reason why he's in the Hall of Fame. People are like, oh, but he's had this drug ban. But the whole bloody league was doing it. He just got thrown under the bus. And yes, the colour of his skin and his background was brought up at the time and is brought up now with how the league treated him, which was shit. Um, the current best player in the NRL and the Super League. I don't really watch the Super League. No lies there. NRL is a difficult one. There are so many good players right now. Now that Cameron Smith has retired, that's a difficult one. There are so many good players right now. That is a difficult one. That's a really difficult one because you've got the Penrith lineup, you've got the Melbourne Storm, you've got the Roosters, you've got the Bunnies. You've got some good young players coming through the Raiders, some good players who've moved to the Bulldogs. There's talent at every single side. I mean, I look at the Titans, they're assembling quite a roster full of talent. The Broncos have always got a talent pool to choose from, even though they've been struggling the last couple of years. They've always got talented players in their ranks. I that one is so difficult because there's so many young talented players coming through at the same time. I couldn't give you best player in the NRL. That most consistent player in recent seasons. Could you say Tedesco, Cleary? Um, that's a hard one. Yeah, the Latrell. You know, there were just so many players. I think every team, I think apart from the West Tigers, could say, look, we've got a player who could be the best player in the NRL on any given season if they had a good run of form. I actually want to, and even with the Bulldogs getting the wooden spoon last year, their roster this year looks good. Why is there? The TV deal, the money, the fan base, percentage, player depth, the fact that the NRL gets free to air and subscription coverage nationally. I know the Super League does now with the Channel 4 agreement, but more people play it as a percentage of the population. It's the second most popular sport after AFL, whereas rugby league is well down the pecking order for grassroots level. There's something to do with it. I think State of Origin helps with the product. The TV deal is worth a hell of a lot more money. It's the players get paid more now. The salary cap's higher. The best Super League talent's gone over there. A whole host of issues. It wasn't always the case. I'm just going to put it out there. It wasn't always the case. But the best players in the world in rugby league play in the NRL. I just hope more French players make it over there as well, because with the rise of Toulouse, Catalan being so solid now, the improvement in the French national side, I hope the best French players make the transition over to the NRL as well, because that adds to the product. With the Dolphins coming in next year, I can see that happening. Before the Super League war, which did actually weaken rugby league in Australia financially, which is why we saw some big name players come over here for lengthier spells than they do now. The Super League in the mid-90s to about 2004 was, I think, slightly better, if not equal to. The NRL is still, I think, recovering somewhat from the mid to late 90s Super League war. I think it changed with better TV deals. Keeping a split TV deal between free to air and subscription, really upselling State of Origin, like really pushing it with the product the State of Origin is. I think that's definitely helped turn the fortunes around a little bit. But you've got more youth players playing as a percentage of the population. There's more youth clubs, grassroots amateur clubs. Even in the states that don't have professional NRL teams, there's still a state grade competition, even in Western Australia. Um, and there are Western Australians playing in the NRL. And there are, there's a possibility they might go back to Perth. They take games on the road, not just like the Magic weekend. They do, COVID notwithstanding, take games to Darwin and Perth and Adelaide. I think the only major city, major state or city they've been to is Tasmania, which is AFL country. They're willing to expand. They're going to expand again. They've had 20 teams in the league at one point. And at the time, the finances didn't work. Now the finances work. But I think what the NRL head office have done with renegotiating the TV deal 2 years ago has definitely helped. Some of the rule changes have been good. Some have been bad. But when they take state of origin to the neutral location, which Adelaide or Perth or Melbourne, although you could argue is that really neutral with the amount of Queensland-based players that play for the Storm, although that is starting to change with more New South Welshmen playing for the Storm. When they take it to when they take on the road to the neutral location, Adelaide or Perth, sellouts. When they take regular season games on the road, COVID notwithstanding, crowd numbers are good. So the NRL knows on a national level they could, in theory, have a team in Adelaide. They could, in theory, have a team in Perth. Now, 20 years ago, when that experiment failed, there wasn't the money in the game because of the Super League war. There's a reason why the Western Suburb Magpies don't exist as a separate entity anymore, or they're part of the West Tigers. There's a reason why the North City Bears are no longer in the competition. The Newtown Jets. There are reasons why some of the foundation clubs are no longer in the first grade. The way the Broncos being brought into the competition actually damaged Queensland Rugby League, and why it's taken, I think, 3 attempts on Gold Coast to finally get a stable team now. In the Titans, they're starting to turn the corner with the Titans, but a lot of missteps there. I'm not sure the Dolphins, ironically, will actually be a stable franchise. But we'll see what happens with the Dolphins. I think they're going to assemble a pretty good squad. It's whether they can actually sustain that in the early seasons, and if things start going wrong and they're paying players big money, how that will actually help or hinder the team going forward. Rugby union in Australia. Well, the test side, the national side, the Wallabies are starting to turn a corner lately. But I think the Super Rugby failure. I will say failure because before the pandemic, there were signs that Super Rugby was starting to fail, and they were showing stress financially. And then the Israel Folau saga, I think, did massively damage the brand. And there's still obsession with Rugby Australia with basically hiring gun mercenary rugby league players, whether they're Australian in origin or South Pacific Islander in origin, to centralise big contracts rather than developing with the money that they're spending on these mercenary gun players, as I call them, these mercenary league players. They could be spending that money in investing in grassroots. To the working class communities and the middle class communities outside of the private school educated, because that's the perception is it's grassroots level. You look at the lower grades in rugby league, the players get paid more. The Sheffield, the Shute Shield is the quality of grassroots domestic in Australia is below Super Rugby is not. I'm not even going to kid you there. It's not great. Whereas in New Zealand and South Africa, Currie Cup and ITS Cup, much better grassroots. It's a fact. So there's a perception it's a snob sport. There's the grassroots level is shambolic. The quality isn't great, and the pay isn't great. And you look at the amount of players you're playing in the NRL and some players in the AFL who at some point, Clint Gutherson's one. Cooper Cronk is a famous one who was a rugby union player. There was a player called Charlie Gubb who played for the Warriors and then the Raiders and went over to the Super League for a little bit. Um, uh, so many of them. I think Clint Gutherson's one of the most famous right now, who's actively in the NRL, who was very tempted by Union, and then yeah, the rest is history with Clint Gutherson. There's some other players as well. There's I forget the Roosters player. It's going to annoy me quite massively because he's a key forward for them. Another um, ex-Union player at youth level. Um, But the big one for me is Cooper Cronk. Imagine Cooper Cronk in the fly half or scrum half position for the Wallabies. Just imagine that with his skill set and his calmness under pressure in big games. I'm just going to put Cooper Cronk out there as a player that rugby union lost in the last 25 years. Just putting that out there. Can you imagine him as a fly half alongside George Gregan, for example, with that experienced scrum half there guiding him around? Just imagine how dangerous they would have been for a long period of time. It it it's one of them. The amount of high quality NRL talent that has played union that has been lost to rugby union because rugby league, even at the lower grades, for match day payments, even though they're part timers in the lower grades and they do have the trades, they work, have another job. The match day payments pay more. Um, the media coverage is better sponsorships, more scouts, um, more grassroots clubs, uh, more youth clubs, more schools play it. So rugby union, I think, has definitely got its priorities wrong, where they're still giving these big centralised contracts out to entice league players over. Um, when they could be spending that money developing the grassroots, developing the game to a wider player base, and going into the lower middle class and the working class communities to challenge, AFL and league at their own game, and they're not doing it, and they're losing out on the talent pool to the other big league, the NRL and the AFL, the bigger leagues. They're just losing out on that talent pool, and they've been losing out for a very, very long time, about 20 years, and that is replicated with the Wallabies in the last 15 years not being anywhere near as good as the South Africans and the All Blacks, and to a certain extent, the Argentinians in growth, development, and consistency. Um, and the Northern Hemisphere nations as well. Just it's been borne out in the last 15 years with the Wallabies, just even at international level, not being as good, suffering some record-breaking defeats to nations that they weren't losing to before. Um, it's a trend. You ignore your grassroots and growing the product, and then when you're signing players like Israel Folau, when he was signed to that big contract, and then the fallout from the Israel Folau, scandal, and there were other players misbehaving as well, but the Lottie Takiris, the Wendell Sailors, the it's not a good look. Yeah, the tide has turned between England and Australia. The pendulum has swung in that regard. In the 90s, yeah, England were getting battered by Australia. Johnny Wilson's debut, I think we lost 70 odd nil back in the late 90s. So, yeah, the pendulum has definitely swung to the Northern Hemisphere's favour in that regard. It's been about 15. I think England and Australia have been on the same kind of decline, I think, since the 2003 World Cup final. England have been to more World Cup finals since then, ironically, than the Australians, but the decline is quite pronounced, I would think. Um, Australia haven't won the World Cup since '99. England have only won it once, and Australia won it twice. So there's your decline. Um, that was when both nations were the best two nations in the world. in my opinion, in the World Cup cycle. Was the 90s through to the early 2000s. After that, well, yes, they've made World Cup finals since then. Both nations have made World Cup finals since then. They haven't taken that next step. And England, like losing to South Africa in World Cup finals, and Australia, like losing to New Zealand in World Cup finals, they haven't taken that next step. And the decline is quite obvious, in my personal opinion. Only two nations have won the World Cup since England lifted the trophy in 2003, and that's South Africa and New Zealand. No other nation has won the World Cup since. So I think that for me is quite indicative of where both nations are at. I can't remember the last time England they beat, and I can't either. Owen Farrell, we know he's had two ankle injuries. He injured one ankle in the autumn, and he's injured his other ankle just before the Six Nations and requires surgery. But his form has been on a down for a while, and I think it's a lot to do with the Saracens scandal. There's been a lot of pressure put, the Saracen salary cap scandal, playing in the Rugby Championship for a year, COVID. There's been a lot of spotlight put upon Owen Farrell as a player at Saracens, and I think the change in style of play, he's very one-dimensional, and look, his form has taken a dip. You can't stay that good so consistent. You're going to have off seasons. You're going to have down swings in your form, but the game is getting younger and faster, and he's not getting any younger. He's 30 now, so I think the amount of rugby he's played has caught up with him a little bit. At the same time, the style of he plays defensively, I think, is what's catching up with him. He's a very physical defender. He can play inside centre. He throws some big hits. He's not a small man. He is actually quite a big unit for a fly half inside centre. The wear and injuries, the body's going to start taking wear and tear when you hit 30. Yes, he's got a couple of years of Test rugby left in him. He will hit over 100 caps. Whether he surpasses Jason Leonard and Ben Youngs, he's got to stay fit. But look, he's out of the Six Nations. He'll be back summer tours, autumn internationals. But midway through a World Cup cycle, he will be going to the World Cup in a couple of years' time, barring injury or suspension. I've got no doubt on that. I think that'll be his last World Cup. But yeah, I think the Saracen salary cap scandals had an impact on his form. I think it's had an impact on England, quite frankly, with their reliance on Saracens players. I think that's definitely had an impact on England's form. The salary cap breaches by Saracens and the subsequent fallout. I did question at the time how much of an impact would it have. 2 years down the line, it's had an impact. Some of the Saracens players, their form has not been as good internationally. And they're not obviously dominating in the Premiership anymore. So there has definitely been a consequence of that. Also, I think, niggling little bumps and bruises have caught up with him, and then he's had these two ankle injuries. And that's the thing. Do I think in my lifetime the Wallabies can win the Bledisloe Cup again? Yes, I do think so. I think the All Blacks aren't the team they were. There are cracks appearing in the All Black system. I think Ireland and France definitely have got the beating of them now regularly, rather than just one-off clutch games. I think Ireland especially have definitely got the beating of the All Blacks if they play their best, and their recent form against the All Blacks would tend to suggest that. France as well, they are a bogey team for the All Blacks historically, going back to the 90s, and that World Cup semi-final. Always had the potential. Now they're doing it regularly again, beating them again. So I think the All Blacks are beatable. However, I think the issues with Australian Rugby Union aren't going to be fixed overnight. Having a good 18-month spell isn't going to fix all the problems that the Wallabies and Rugby Australia have. I think it's sticking plaster. And we'll see what happens. But the money side of things, some of the best All Black talent is looking at the European leagues, the French league, and the English league, and the Pro League, well, the United Rugby Championship now, and Northern the Major League Rugby to get a payday. So that makes them eligible for selection for the All Blacks. So there is a risk with the money side of things and the current restrictions in New Zealand from the Ardern government. Oh yes, the socialist utopia that is New Zealand, which is not actually the case because people are starting to wane in their patience with the Ardern's government's restrictions. I think that's going to entice some of the Kiwis to look at maybe going to Europe and North America earlier in their careers, which I think impacts the All Blacks. So yes, I do think the Australians can win the Bledisloe Cup again, but a lot of things have to go in their favour. But there are things that are happening economically and politically which may actually help them do that. At the moment, though, while the Aussies have had a resurgence in form, I don't think it's quite enough. I think it will still be 5, 10 years down the line, I think, before that happens. But I do think they do it again. Yes. I am surprised, but I'm not surprised. But they've played in 2 World Cup finals and lost them both. So the problem with France has been on a one-off game, they're brilliant. It's consistency, and that's something they haven't had since the 90s. Is consistency. The 80s to the 90s, they were one of the best teams in Europe, and regularly did duff up the Southern Hemisphere nations when they wanted to on their day. It was just being consistent. They could win, all the games up to that semi-final, and then they lose the semi-final. So it was a big pressure game. They couldn't quite get over the line. At the same time, now they are a powerhouse. There's no doubt on that. They are building for the World Cup in 2 years' time. They're building quite well. Unlike the 2007 World Cup, where it all went a bit wrong for them, this time around, I think they've got it right. I think they've got the good young, they've got the game plan right. Powerful pack, talented backline. They've gone back to what was good in the 90s with and the 80s with the French sides. And consistency in selection and the style of play that just suits the rugby DNA. But I'm not surprised they haven't won the World Cup. Only 4 nations have won the World Cup. 3 of them are Southern Hemisphere nations. So there you go. But I think France have a very good chance in 2 years' time. Gregan, Latham, Larkham, Eales, Burke. Yeah, the 90s and 2000s for Australia. Back-to-back World Cup finals, 99 2003. 2 World Cup wins in 8 years. Yeah, in my opinion, the 90s era for Australia was when they were the best team in the world. They were the best team in the world. And then South Africa came out of the apartheid era and rejoined the international sporting community, which I think's had an impact on the Wallabies, the Springboks post 95 being allowed back into the fold. But they were the best team for that period of time. The 90s, it was Australia's decade. They failed to build upon that post 2003. They have really failed to build upon the legacy that those players have. Nice to meet you, Jake. Welcome aboard to the community. If you've got any other friends that you want to recommend to come have a look, feel free. I will say this: Dan has mentioned that obviously most of his friendship group are baseball and NFL fans. The reason why I've been covering Major League Baseball is because of the lockout, and I've looked, and most of my Major League Baseball videos are in regards to the labour unrest and the history of the sport, rather than positive videos. They're more, this sport's got a lot of scandal. So, and as a sports fan, if you're I'll casually watch a Major League Baseball game. We're not having spring training is not taking place on time. The longer this goes on, without some kind of positive negotiations where there's movement and a compromise by both sides, I think we could have a lost season, which will be ruinous for Major League Baseball in the short to medium, possibly long term. And then what happens to the Toronto Blue Jays? Will we have another Montreal Expos in our hands, where the team just cannot stay in Canada? Do I think Ireland can win a Rugby World Cup? They've got the pieces in place. They've just got to get past the quarterfinal. If they can get past that quarterfinal and get that off their backs, and get to the semi-final, then yes, anything's possible. They are, in my opinion, in the top four nations in the world right now. Right now, like the French, the South Africans, and the All Blacks, they are the top four nations in the world. So yes, I do believe they are a semi-final team at worst. It's just getting past that quarter-final crunch game, and I do think, again, midway through a World Cup cycle, they're in the right position. Well, they haven't quite peaked yet, but they're doing the right direction, the right trend, in my opinion. But we were saying that before the 2019 World Cup, and again, quarter-final exit. So what do I know? But I do believe they have the pieces in place to do it. It's whether they can actually get it done at quarter-final stage, get over that hurdle, and then it really is the best four teams in the world going head to head. But that's my opinion. They need to peak at the right time, which is the World Cup. So I think they peaked before the last World Cup. I think 2018 they peaked, but they, even though they lost to France yesterday, they are showing some good signs that they've got the pieces in place to definitely challenge. Yes, but a lot can happen in 2 years. You want to peak at the World Cup, not before. They unfortunately peaked before the World Cup last time. So, but with some new young talent coming through, and they always have young talent coming through, they've been the most consistent European side the best part of a decade now, over a decade now. Um, we'll see what happens with the Irish, but I do believe they can. It's just getting past that quarter-final stage. Once they've done that, then yes, then it really is. You've got that big. Once you get that big game mentality right, then anything's possible. They've got to win that big game, which is the quarter-final. If they can do that, then yes, they've got that hoodoo off their back, that monkey off their back, and then yeah, semi-final and final would prove a lot easier because you've now won the pressure game, and then you go into another pressure game and you know how to deal with it. But they've fallen short in too many quarterfinals. But we'll see what happens. They've had some low points in the last 25 years, but I do believe now they are in the right place and they've got the right development structures and a lot of really talented young players coming through all at the same time. I think all the Six Nations have got some really young, talented players who we're going to see over the next couple of games, the next three games, um, getting experience before the World Cup. So the Six Nations really have got a lot of young talent all playing at the same time. So that's why the Six Nations are, for me, is more competitive than the Rugby Championship. You've got those two extra nations playing in it, and the domestic European leagues are, I think, a higher quality than Super Rugby because there's more games to play, there's more depth to it, and there's more money, so players can get paid. But yes, I do believe they can. It's just getting over that quarter final hoodoo that seems to bug them. They get the quarter final and don't take that next step, but then they fail to get out of the group stage a couple of times as well. So it's about peaking at the right time, and they've got the pieces in place to do that. I don't want to peak too early like they did last time, so that's something they've got to be mindful of, definitely. But that's a good question, though. As for Ireland, talk about Ireland FA, they are broke. Yes, yes, I follow the Off the Ball radio podcast on YouTube, and that's from an Irish perspective. So they cover football, they cover the Gaelic Amateur Association sports, they cover the rugby union, and some other sports stories as well. But yes, the FIA are in serious trouble. Of course, you've got the Northern Irish Football Association, which is linked because of the political situation in Ireland between North and South and all that. But yes, the FIA are in serious trouble. They have been for quite some time. COVID exacerbated that. Um, they're not the only governing body of a sport in serious financial difficulty. So that's a known fact. But yes, there are structural problems. The domestic league itself is in a reasonable position of good support for the league level it's at, and the best Irish talent does end up in the big British leagues in Scotland and England, and occasionally Irish players do play on the continent and play at a high level. Um, but on the governance side of it and the money side of it, yes, they are in serious trouble. This is why I think this World Cup bid or Euros bid now, because they're not going to bid the 2030 joint bid for the World Cup, is crucial to the Irish FA. If they fail to get that joint bid with us and get the tournament, the Euros in 2028, then yes, their finances are going to be in a mess for a long, long time. And missing out on hosting Euros games because Dublin, as a city, just pulled out again has hurt the Irish FA. They were banking on that as well. That didn't happen. So yes, while the domestic league isn't the best league in Europe, obviously it's not even in the top 10. I think it's ranked 18th for leagues in Europe. Um, uh, Attendances for the grounds they have are good. So even if it's only like 4 to 5,000 at a game, they sell out. It's um, The problem is they are losing junior players that switch allegiance to England or Scotland. That's happened, and they are also at risk of losing youth talent to the Gaelic Association sports, so hurling and Gaelic football. And the best Gaelic football players end up playing in the AFL in Australia anyway, so they're at risk of losing that athletic talent. And rugby union as well is better professional structures and the professional game is doing really well. The national side is doing really well, so they are at risk of losing talent to other of the home nations and other sports, and that is a massive problem. And it's something that they haven't really resolved, quite frankly. But the situation with the Irish FA predates the COVID pandemic. That I remember watching Off the Ball a couple of years ago, just before the pandemic was a thing, when I was still living with my extended family, and back in 2018, 2019, and they were discussing the situation with with um, with the Irish FA, the FIA of Ireland, having money issues predating the pandemic. So, in regards to the structural problems, there's a lot of structural. And Mick McCarthy, I feel sorry for Mick McCarthy in the way his, you know, termination of his contract the last time he was Ireland manager was handled. I think that was handled very, very badly. Um, and he copped a lot of crap, but he was like, look, this is what happens with contractual arrangements. On his side of things, his agent and himself were happy with the contract he signed. Obviously, it didn't work out. The FIA obviously terminated his contract. They had to pay him out. That's not Mick McCarthy's fault. That's the FIA's fault for having a payout clause so big that they couldn't really afford. So that's not Mick McCarthy's fault in that regard. Losing Declan Rice to England was a blow. They've lost other players as well, but they've also had some pretty good players who could have played for Northern Ireland, Scotland, and England who've played for them, who they've managed to retain in years past. So Kevin Kilbane, for example, Mick McCarthy himself. Um, you, you've had other players, Matty Holland. Um, we're going back to the 2000s and the 90s here with some of the players that could have played for England, could have played for Wales, could have played for Scotland, could have played for Northern Ireland. They managed to say, look, come play for us in the past. They've had some good World Cup runs at USA '94 and Japan in 2002. They've had some good runs at the Euros as well when they qualified in the '80s and the 2000s. So they've had some good tournament appearances. However, the Mick McCarthy situation, and this was well covered by the Off the Ball channel on YouTube. Check it out. Honestly, check it out. Mick McCarthy, he took a lot of crap in the Irish press for the performances, and that fine. Okay, he selects the team, he sets the tactics, and it didn't work out. That you can't replicate what he did in 2002. The quality level of players he had available was less than you know previous. That's a known fact. Um, um, but at the same time, the FIA, when they decided to sack him, they had to honour the termination clause in the contract, which was a lot of money. I think it was about €3 million or something. He got paid out a lot of money. It wasn't like a small amount of cash because he had a fair length of contract that he signed, and they had to pay him out. That's not Mick McCarthy's fault. He's argued that I want this contract. I want to have. If I do not extend, it's fine. We leave on good terms. If you decide to part ways, if either a club come along and say, look, we want Mick McCarthy to coach our club, they've got to pay the FIA money. That didn't happen. They decided to sack him. And course, there's a termination clause, and they've got to pay him out, and that's on the FIA's fault for agreeing to a pay structure with him. That's not his fault. He obviously wants to get paid. It's his career. It's his job. He wants to get the best possible salary he can. Club football could pay him more. Ironically, he could get paid more at a Premier League or Championship club. He chose to actually take a pay cut to coach the Irish side, but they decided to, in the break clause, to pay him out and sign that paperwork. Should he have his contract terminated early, that they would pay him out plus the performance bonuses. So that's on the FIA really not backing themselves and striking a harder bargain. Quite frankly. There you go. The two World Wars decreased the world's population quite massively. How much different would the sport mode look if the death toll wasn't so high with the competition off the charts right now? A lot of professional and amateur athletes served in both World Wars. There were professional football players and rugby union, rugby league players and ice hockey players of the NHL who served in both conflicts. A lot of them didn't come back, which is quite striking. Would the competition be off the charts right now? That's a hypothetical. That's an unknown answer to that one. It's a good question, though. It's a good question, Jake. But it's a hypothetical what if. You look at the amount of high profile players. You go and you have to understand the history of the NHL, the old English football, Division One. The rugby league communities up north in England and Australia as well. The rugby union, you know, players. Bear in mind they were fully amateur. Who and the cricketers and who all signed up either volunteered or conscription. And it's not just in the Anglo-Saxon, the English-speaking world, but you look at Germany. Both World Wars, football players happily signed up. It's yeah, no, a lot of them didn't come back, and there are memorials at a lot of clubs in the UK and in Germany and in France where players didn't come back, and rugby league in France. I mean, that was considered resistance, so that was made illegal. And if you were caught playing, you got sent to concentration camps. So, and it's only recently the French government has issued an apology, and it's not even a pretty good apology. It's been a pretty crappy apology from the French government in that regard in the last couple of years. So yeah, massive social impacts. What's come out of that, however, is the strong club culture in Europe, in regard and in Australia and New Zealand to a certain extent with their professional sports teams, which is completely different to the US and Canada. Completely different. It's strengthened the club culture, and what happened since World War II again. With the Yugoslav wars as well, there's a strong community kind of link between the clubs and the towns and cities that they play in. It's something that you can't replicate in the US and Canada. You just can't replicate it really. But it's an interesting topic, looking at those that were amateurs and professionals who were playing in team sports who signed up and served on both sides of the conflict. It's amazing to look at those who could have gone on to have massive careers, and obviously their lives were cut short, or they were invalided out of the service and couldn't compete anymore. How that affected modern sport as we see it going into the modern era, into the 50s, 60s, and now in modern day. Yes, it did obviously have an impact. But that's an interesting question. Whether the competition would be better or worse, that's hypothetical. Honestly, hypothetical. The answer is you just don't know. Was Wayne Rooney? Wayne Rooney, I think, qualified for Ireland, England, and Scotland. Steve McManaman qualified for Ireland as well. Tries to play for England. Michael Owen could have played for Wales. So that's a very interesting one. Yes, Wayne Rooney does qualify for Three Nations. He chose to play for England, and there's a whole host of reasons for that. But there you go. Uh, I mean, you've got players like Stephen Reid, for example, play for Ireland, could play for England. Ryan Giggs could have played for England, played for Wales. So that's where the FIA has got things wrong since the 90s. Is some of their best players that could have played for them have played for England, Wales, or Scotland, or even Northern Ireland as well. Um, uh, what rule changes would I make to association football? Was the best way to describe it. Soccer and football, obviously, it's technically the official name is association football. Um, that's an interesting one. I wouldn't change the number of players on the field. I would definitely have harsher punishments for faking, so diving simulation. It's already in the rule book anyway; it's just not enforced. I would fully mic up the referees like they do in other professional sports like rugby union, rugby league, ice hockey, even cricket, NFL. Whenever there's a penalty call, the referee goes to the side of the field, fully mic'd up, explains what the call is for, and challenges to it. The VAR, I would have that fully mic'd up so we understand what the referee's looking for, and what the VAR official's looking for. That's transparency. You would actually get less dissent from players, less of the abuse that players give officials. That would suddenly clear that up because that is also in the rule book that abuse of an official is a yellow or red card depending on the severity. We've seen other sports where that's just not tolerated and the players are suspended and sent off. So or ejected. So I would definitely have the referees fully mic'd up. I would change the definition of handball. Uh, I'd get rid of the accidental, deliberate, and make it like a foot foul in basketball, where if it strikes your foot, it's possession to the other team. Same with a knock on in rugby league or rugby union. It's the other team's feeding a scrum. So yeah, handball. Get rid of accidental, deliberate. It's a penalty or free kick to the other side. The how offside, how far would you have to be in clearance of with a, I would say bring back the old definition of offside, a clear gap between defender and attacker. um uh, I would say for a set play you've got a minute on the clock. um Also, when there is a stoppage in play, stop the clock, so you get rid of the added time at the end of games. I'll get rid of that. So if there's a stoppage, the clock stops, like in rugby union, like in ice hockey, like in rugby league. If there is, the referee goes, right, stop the play, injury or foul or substitution, the play clock stops. So you get rid of the added time. Um, but overly not overly, I wouldn't make too many rule changes. I would think dissent towards officials needs to be punished more. Diving needs to be punished more on the field. I think the referees need to back themselves in that one. Um, Mic up the referees fully, therefore the players can't get away with the dissent, the abuse of officials. They would very quickly change their attitudes. The hounding of the referee, that would very, very quickly stop. I tell you that now. Um, and if that continues, yeah, suspend the players longer, fine the players more. Um, and I do believe, I think a salary cap for the European and South American leagues is definitely the European leagues is a must. But that's a UEFA FIFA decision. But that's something if I was um, working on rule changes, I think that's something that would need to be brought in. But I think the player wages are too inflated for that, so the salary cap is going to be ridiculous. But that's something that needs to be looked at. Is wage control, and a transfer cap as well. And also manager sackings. If that's your manager for the season. The transfer window, I would have it summer only. That's your squad for the season. Um, Try and promote more youth development from within your youth ranks. Um, but there's ways of doing that. But That's my football utopia. What number am I in rugby and football? Well, rugby league, I play a little bit of rugby league, and the numbers are different in rugby league to rugby union. They're in reverse. So the back line has the lower numbers, and the forwards have the higher numbers. So rugby league, I'll be a 2 or a 4 or a 1, so fullback or winger. Rugby union, I'll be a 14, 11 or a 15. Football, I'll be a 1. I was a goalkeeper. So I was a goalkeeper or I was ironically a right-footed left back, left winger. So for a little bit, but I was more of a goalkeeper. So there you go. Um, that's my positioning. If you want to go on a traditional football lineup, I'll be a number 1 or a number 3, basically. Maybe a number 11 for the left winger. If we're going by rugby league, I'll be a 1, a 4, or a 2. So either wing or a fullback, and that's the same in rugby union, a 15, a 14, or an 11. Uh, Occasionally, I did play as an outside centre, so a 13, or in rugby league terms, left centre, so I'll be a 3, I think. I think the left centre in league is a 3. Don't quote me on that. Um, no, 4 is the right centre, so I would be a 5, a 2, or a 1. I keep getting those numbers weird, mucking them up. Um, so there you go. In cricket, I was a lower order batsman, so I'll come back between 9 and 11. Uh, chronic cricket. I could either hit a couple of big sixes and a couple of fours, or I'll be out first ball. So didn't have a great batting average in cricket. It'll be I either get about 20 runs off an over or no runs off an over. Um, there you go. So I'll either on there you go. So rugby league, I would have been a 5, or a 2 or a 1, occasionally a 3, yeah, left centre. Rugby union, it would be 13, 14, 11 or 15. Football, goalkeeper. So if you're looking at 1 to 11, I'll be your number 1. Uh, or ironically, I'll be sometimes the left back or left winger. So that'd be your number 3 or your number 11 if you're looking at the traditional lineup, or number 8, depending on how you number your formation. So that's basically it. A right-footed left winger or a goalkeeper in football. Um, Ironically, put on the left wing in rugby, either code for some reason, or left centre in rugby league, or outside centre in union. Um, Ironically, I was there more for my defensive play than scoring play in both codes of rugby. I would just tackle all day. It didn't matter if it was a big guy coming at me or a small guy at me. I'm throwing my body at them. Quite quite frankly, I'm getting stuck in. So I should have. Well, I was a bit small for an outside centre, but my kicking game wasn't that accurate. So I couldn't. I wasn't great as inside centre. So outside centre, or winger or fullback, because I would just tackle all day. Which unfortunately in rugby terms is not what you want for your outside backs. Uh, Outside centre, okay, you can get away with that, but your wingers and your fullback, you want them to create more and score more. And I was more there for my gritty determination, and I was a bit of a pest as well. I liked getting in the opposition face and getting a bit yeah, throw a couple of punches in a few games at school level, which didn't go down so well. I got a bit gnarly, but my coaches liked that. Ironically, they liked me getting angry because my teammates would play better when I got pissed off for some reason. Partly because they were scared of me, I think, punching them as well. But I was one of those, not the most skilled, but definitely the most aggressive. I had a chip on my shoulder playing rugby. I enjoyed it, but I wasn't a try scoring machine by any means. I was more of an um, angry, angry, gnarly player. Not a pest. I wouldn't get under player skins. I wouldn't start the fights. I'd finish them. But I did start out as a second row in rugby union. I started out as the left lock, so I'd been number 5. So I did start out in the second row when I first started, and I moved to the back line um, for reasons. Don't ask why my coach decided to do that. He just decided to do it, and it worked for me. But there you go. Do I like the new 4K cameras the networks are using, and they are increasing viewership? I wouldn't necessarily say they're increasing viewership, because not everyone can afford a 4K TV or a 4K laptop. My laptop does not like 4K. It struggles a little bit with pixelation. Admittedly, the laptop is 4 years old. I don't mind the full HD. 4K is it actually increasing viewership? I don't think anyone. I don't think everyone has that disposable income the last couple of years to go for 4K. I know the networks, um, both here in Europe and in North America and in Australia, are pushing the 4K rollout and giving that option. But we haven't even got full HD rollout yet for every household with the ability to buy the top end, expensive. You you've got standard def, so 1080 or 720 pixels per second, which is pretty good quality, which is what you'll probably watch this in, is 720 to 1080p. Then you've got HD, then you've got Ultra HD, and then you've got 4K. Um, my TV, which you can see in the background, is Ultra HD compatible, but is HD. That TV is 7 years old. Um, that's still a quality piece of kit for a 27.5 inch TV. It's not the best TV in the world, I'll admit that. Um, and if I was to try and watch 4K, that would be unviewable. Um, I I like the fact I think we've gone a bit too far with some of the action replays and watching the speeds of sweat bounce off the player's skin when they collide. I just like watching sport. I don't need it in 4K. I've been to enough live sport in my lifetime to say I don't need 4K. I'm quite happy watching on 720 or 1080 um, uh, HD. Um, I think UHD and 4K. It actually gives me a headache. It does actually give me a headache, if I'm being brutally honest. Um, I'm. It's the Rams Bengals, isn't it? I'm hoping the Bengals win because the Rams in their history have won before. I'm hoping the Bengals win. I think Ohio as a state needs a winning team. Not gonna lie. The Cleveland Browns are just a mess. Um, the Columbus Blue Jackets have only won one playoff series. Uh, yeah, let's get a winning team in Ohio for once. It's just come on. It's been a long time since the Cleveland Browns were any good, and the Bengals. Let's get a winning team in Ohio, just please. I don't care what the score is. I'm not watching it. I've got to be up at 4 o'clock in UK time, so I've got to be up in 5 hours for work. So I'm not watching the Super Bowl tonight because I actually have a really busy day tomorrow. We're short staffed at work, so I'm not watching the Super Bowl for the third year in the row. I'm not watching the Super Bowl. That's a record for me. Never gone this long without watching Super Bowls. Because when I was a kid, half-term holidays in February, mid-February, you're off school in the UK, and same with college as well. When I was 16, 17, 18, 19, we class as tertiary education, the step below university. Again, was mid as you in America we call semester, we call it term time, mid-term break. So yeah, this will be the third year in a row I'm not watching the Super Bowl, which is really weird. But I've sort of lost my love for the NFL the last few years. Um, I think the London series for me, I think it's run its course. I think it's as a product you can't get any better. I think it's sort of the honeymoon period's gone for that. It's but that's just me. Um, is anyone at your work a former talented athlete? My previous work, my friend Dave used to play non-league football and beer league hockey. Um, I've worked with a couple of ex semi-pro um, players, rugby and rugby league and football in my time. I've worked with some non-league football players who play semi-pro. At my current work, I've worked with a couple of Xboxers, um, both amateur and professional, um, but they weren't high level. Um, but I've worked with some ex semi-pro football players, semi-pro rugby players. So I've worked with some ex-athletes, yes, in my time. I'm I'm still getting to know people at my current workplace. I'm still getting to know faces. I've been there like 4.5 months, but I don't know everyone really well. But there is we've had a couple of temporary contract workers. There was one lad we had last week who's a semi-pro football player. Um, who's played for a couple of clubs locally. Who was being scouted by some League Two, League One conference and championship clubs were scouting his club, watching one of his club's games, midweek game and weekend games. So there's some scouts in. And our depot is right by the local football club as well. And one of the lads who I work with, his son is in the Reading Academy at the moment. Uh, so uh, so we'll see. As for Ohio, Cleveland Barons were an NHL team. They were woeful. New Orleans, I can't see NHL working in New Orleans. Obviously, you've got the Pelicans in I believe it's the Pelicans in the NBA, and you've obviously got the Saints in the NFL. South Carolina, the Hurricanes cover both Carolinas. Um, and obviously Cleveland's got the Browns and Cincinnati's got the Bengals. But the Cleveland, you know, the Cleveland's had an NHL team before, and it was not very good. Ohio doesn't have a great history with uh, the major leagues for some reason. Great university programs in Ohio, collegiate programs on the NCAA circuit in a variety of sports. But when it comes to pro sports, oh my god, it's a disaster. I just it boggles belief. Although the Blue Jackets are a solid outfit, their lack of playoff success is troubling. Um, the fact the Coyotes have had more playoff success than the Blue Jackets is terrifying. and oh dear, oh dear. Um, and the Carolinas, both states are covered by the Hurricanes. So um, unfortunately, that argument goes. But New Orleans, that would be interesting if New Orleans can have another professional um, major league team there. I know you've got the Nola Gold in Major League Rugby. That's small fry. Obviously, it's still a team in New Orleans that's professional. That's playing at the top level in the US. You've got the Pelicans and the Saints. I can't see the NHL working in New Orleans, and I can't see baseball uh, working down there either. I don't know why. I think New Orleans is a unique city in regards to its culture, its history in comparison to other cities in the US. It's just a unique place. Um, the Cleveland Barons were an NHL team. They were hopeless. So the NHL has been burned by Cleveland before. And New Orleans, I can't see the NHL going to New Orleans. The league is at a nice even 32 team league now. Arizona aren't relocating out of Arizona. They've now signed that agreement with Tempe, which is more in the Phoenix metropolitan area. Ownership and league are pumping $1 billion into that. Um, they've signed the agreement with Tempe. They've signed the ASU agreement on a temporary basis. Well, yeah, smaller capacity. The Arizona State University gets money out of it, which will then go into their NCAA program. Be it so, yeah. When and most of the fans that want Arizona moved, ironically, are from the Toronto area or the Eastern Seaboard, so a traditional market, and that's what I find hilarious. No, I don't think the NHL goes to Houston. I don't think there's any relocation. I think a team that's more likely to be now that Arizona have got certainty with their arena situation. I think the only team that's really in danger of an arena issue is two teams. They're both in Canada. One's at Ottawa and one's in Calgary. Um, there's your answer. Every other team now has a solid arena deal or anything like that. So the two teams that would be relocated would be Calgary or Ottawa. They're the ones with bad arena deals. The Florida Panthers, people go, move the Panthers. They're actually doing quite well where they are in league terms anyway. Attendance terms, the arena is in a bad location, but for whatever reason, Miami as a city, attendance is a bad regardless of how good or bad teams do. Ask Dolphins fans, ask Inter Miami fans. Doesn't matter how well or bad a team, Marlins fans, doesn't matter how good or bad the team is, for whatever reasons in Miami, compared to other parts of Florida, fans don't turn up. So that's a Miami issue. But the Sunrise location is shocking. Whoever thought putting that arena there was a good idea is brain dead. But the Panthers get a really good arena deal out of it. They've got a long term lease. The team is actually got a good product on the ice. The only teams that I think get relocated right now that are in danger are Ottawa and Calgary. Calgary's arena deal has collapsed with the city, and Ottawa, their arena's in a bad location in the metropolitan area of Ottawa. It should be on the Berriton Flats. We know that. Ownership doesn't help, but again, that's to do with ownership. The Flames ownership and the Senators ownership having disagreements with city councillors. So the Senators win their first game away in Washington for how long? What, 8 years? That's ridiculous. And considering they've been to conference finals and had deep runs in the playoffs in that time, that is ridiculous. But it also shows how solid the Capitals have been at home, a very good home team, for a very, very long time. The Senators had some good teams in that period. However, the last 5 years, the team's been dreadful. So I'm not overly surprised, but I'm surprised that it dates back before the rebuild when Erik Karlsson was part of the team. That does surprise me a little bit that it's been 8 years. At the same time, the Capitals have been such a consistent team, a playoff team regularly in that time frame, whereas the Senators haven't. So I'm not overly surprised, but the fact it goes back before the rebuild, pre 2016, 2017, does surprise me a little bit. But I wouldn't say overly surprised. I don't think that the league is going to expand past 32, though. And I think if we're talking about relocation, it'll be Calgary or Ottawa that would be relocated. Now that Arizona have got an arena deal in place long term with a new arena, and they've got a temporary arena in place. Now that the Islanders have got their new arena at Belmont, I can't see any other team in danger of relocation apart from those two Canadian franchises because their arena deals aren't great. The Saddle Dome either needs a massive refurb or a new arena built, and Ottawa, their arena is in a terrible location. The fact that you've got Quebec with a ready arena and Houston with a ready arena there you go. But I think the weak Canadian dollar will be more of an incentive to move a team. Do they get screwed by Gary Bettman? I'm going to say this now. Gary Bettman, much like Rob Manfred and Roger Goodell, as commissioners of their prospective sports, and all three of them are all equally unpopular with their fan bases, are hired by the team owners. They are basically the mouthpiece of what the owners want to say. So they take the abuse from the fans, so the owners don't. Okay? Put that out there in perspective. I think Gary Bettman's done a pretty decent job, considering where the league was when he was appointed commissioner. There was scandal off the ice. Previous, presidents, hockey operations. There was some corruption involved in that. There's all sorts of issues. Yes, there's been 3 lockouts and a player strike since Gary Bettman has been in his position. And yeah, Canadian teams going, well, we haven't had a Canadian winner since before Bettman, by the way, just being out there. And the expansion in non-traditional markets. Some of those expansion teams, guess what? Won the Stanley Cup. So it hasn't always been been bad for hockey. And those relocation teams, like Arizona, if you don't have the Coyotes, you don't get Austin Matthews. Just putting it out there. You don't get all those new players playing in Arizona. Without Vegas and Seattle, you don't get the explosion in Vegas for people wanting to play the game. Um, Texas has got more registered hockey players than any other state or territory um, in the US or Canada outside of Toronto. So I don't think they get screwed by Gary Bettman. I think bad ownership has screwed the Canadian teams, not Gary Bettman. I think they're in the right divisions, they're in the right conferences. It's a false narrative. Bad ownership has screwed Canadian teams. Ask Senators fans with Eugene Melnyk. Ask Oiler fans for 30 years. Some economics in there as well with the weaker Canadian dollar for the majority of the time. There was a period where the Canadian dollar was pretty strong, and we've had Stanley Cup finalists from Canada since Gary Bettman has been the commissioner of the NHL. Let's not kid ourselves. So no, Gary Bettman has not screwed the Canadian teams, because if that was the case, there wouldn't be 7 owners of 7 Canadian franchises if the league was screwing them. They would have gone, we've had enough of this, we're pulling out. So, no, that's not the case. The fact that you've got, you know, 23, 23? 25 US based teams means you're more likely to get a US winner of the Stanley Cup. It's just plain mathematics. In regards to the Senator situation, yeah, the public transport links to the arena are the problem. It's not that if you can get an Uber or your own personal vehicle, that's fine. It's the public transport, the bus and rail links, and the metro. Well, I don't know if Oshawa has a metro, but I do know it has rail links. The bus and rail routes aren't close to the arena. That is a problem. That is an issue that the Ottawa City Council decided to get rid of the bus route that went to the arena. So that is an issue between ownership and City Council trying to work out, things out there. The proposed site, the new arena, yeah, has a railway station right by it and a bus station right by it. The arena itself, the Canadian Tire Centre, is not a bad arena. No, not at all. It's not a bad arena. Its location is the problem. The Saddle Dome, however, is an aging arena. It's not the oldest, that's Madison Square Garden, but it does urgently need refurbishment or complete rebuild. Much like they did with Key Bank in Seattle. Climate Pledge, the old Key Bank, they completely rebuilt it internally, which meant Seattle joined the league a year later than anticipated. Madison Square Garden, I don't know how they keep that going, but it's had multiple refurbs. It was built in the 60s, the current Madison Square Garden. Nationwide Arena in Columbus is starting to creak a little bit and needs a bit of love. It is what it is. Like, some of these arenas are amazing, absolutely amazing. And the Tempe Arena is going to be amazing. I have no doubt that Arizona's new home will be amazing in 3-4 years' time. But because they've got a temporary arena, although it's a smaller in capacity, they get around the problem. I'm surprised they didn't share with the Tucson Roadrunners. To be fair, it's a bigger arena; you can get more fans in there. But it is what it is. The Roadrunners have their arenas themselves. Arizona ain't moving. Like, the fact the team isn't very good, I don't think helps. If the team was good and they weren't drawing fans, that's different. The team has been bad for quite some time by design. Unfortunately, bad ownership, bad GM moves have contributed to Arizona being where they are. No one's saying move the Montreal Canadiens. Their team sucks. So, you can have a proper market and a crap team. Toronto, they've not won the Stanley Cup since '67. No, at no point are they saying move the Maple Leafs. That team has sucked for over 50 years. Guess what? Fans keep turning up. So some markets will continue to support failure. Other markets, you want to build a community and a fan base, and you need success to do that. And there were times they were saying move the Penguins. you know, move the Penguins. They suck. Even when they've won Stanley Cups, they were like, "Oh no, they're struggling. Move them." We nearly had the Penguins move. So the Devils, they've won Stanley Cups. Move the team. They suck. Weird how fickle fans can be. But it's more to do with ownership mismanagement. I mean, the Devils' ownership is they call it the product rather than the team. They really screwed that up. Their obsession with gambling ads. Devils' ownership are chronic bad ownership, but the league has no. I mean, the Devils as an organisation has moved more than any other organisation in the NHL. 3 times. They've been in 3 different locations as an organisation. The Colorado Rockies, Cleveland Barons. I think they're in Kansas City as well. I think they've been 4 times. Um, and they're in New Jersey. So, yeah. Um, any desire to see Fenway Park? Look, I've been to Anfield. I've been to Fratton Park. That's another old stadium. Um, and to get into the one of the stands, you have to actually go through a pub. Um, I've been to some modern stadiums. I've been to some rebuilt old stadiums that have been on the site for a long time, like Vicarage Road and Watford. I've been to the old Griffin Park in Brentford, which is now gone. The new stadium is literally down the road. I've been to Anfield, as I say. I've been to Twickenham, and that's completely different now than what it was in the early 90s. It's completely been redeveloped. So on the same site. Um, Fenway Park is one of them. I'm not a baseball fan, but I would like to see it. I would like to see Fenway Park just to say that I've seen it. I've seen one of the oldest continuously used sports facilities in the world. Absolutely. I have no disagreement with that. I would like to see, yeah, I would like to see Fenway Park just to go untouched history. Not that I'm a baseball fan myself, but that would be something on the bucket list to do. But I also want to go to the Hockey Hall of Fame and the Hockey Museum in Toronto. But Toronto is an expensive city to visit, and not something that I can financially do at this time. But I also want to go see the MCG in Australia and the Sydney Cricket Ground as well. I've been to Lords, so I've seen the history there. Um, I want to go to the Oval in South London has been completely redeveloped, so the old building is not a lot of it left. More modern. But I've been to Lords, so I've seen the history there, which is the oldest cricket ground in the world. I've been to Twickenham, the oldest rugby union ground in the world. So I've been to some places. Some of the places I've been to no longer exist as sports venues, which is a shame. The old Bracknell Ice Rink was the first Olympic-sized ice rink in the UK. I've been there hundreds of times. Not open anymore. It's all boarded up. Its future is undecided. What's going to happen with the site? So yeah, bit of British sporting history is about to get demoed. But I've been to some old football stadiums, as I say, Fratton Park in Portsmouth, Vicarage Road, another old stadium, completely redeveloped now, by the way. But the site is being there continuously used for a long time by Watford Football Club. The old Griffin Park, that's gone now. But I've been to Anfield, one of the oldest stadiums in English football, although that's constantly been redeveloped in place, in situ. So yeah, I've been to some football stadiums. I've been to some newer ones as well, like the Madejski, St Mary's, which I think lack a lot of character. They're very soulless, in my opinion. They don't have a lot of character, which is a massive shame because I think that takes away. Like Fratton Park, there's character to it. The atmosphere is different to St Mary's down the road in Southampton. Completely different. Um, I've been to Dorchester Town Football Club. That's where my granddad's funeral wake was held because my dad used to play for the club. So family link with the Dorchester Town Football Club. It's quite strong. So yeah, there are certain stadiums on my bucket list. However, a lot of the historical ones are being redeveloped, so they lose a bit of that history where the stands are completely rebuilt, the stadium is completely rebuilt, and you lose a little bit. So that's why I think Fenway Park is one of those that's still on the bucket list, still there. I also want to go to Madison Square Garden as well because it is the oldest NHL NBA arena in use. So I want to go to the Garden at some point. Obviously, the Joe Louis is gone. It's now Little Caesars. That's gone. Montreal Forum's gone. Um, Maple Leaf Gardens is gone. Um, so some of the old arenas that the NBA and the NHL used to use have gone, which is unfortunate, but a necessary evil, I think. But I do want to go see the Saddle Dome before it actually does get finally replaced in Calgary. I do want to go see that. Not going to lie, I do want to see the Saddle Dome just because it's unique shape. Even though it's an aging building by US stadium standards, there are some stadiums in Europe that are a lot older, that are held together with gaffer tape. But yeah, something like Fenway Park that's over a century old and still in original configuration, pretty much is something that I would like to definitely go and see. Even though I'm not a baseball fan, it's just the sporting history behind it and the cultural history and the social history behind it as a landmark in Boston. That's definitely something that I would like to see. Um, but I also want to go see the LA Coliseum as well. They're holding NASCAR at the LA Coliseum. Work that one out. That's mental. But I would like to go to the LA Coliseum, just because it's the LA Coliseum. Um, I would like to go see the Rose Bowl, and some of the old university stadiums in the US because some of them are absolutely historic. Um, and there's a few other stadiums like the San Siro and the San Nicola, in Italy and Bari, and um, there's a few stadiums, yeah, like the Parc des Princes, in Paris, the second stadium of Paris, because obviously the Stade de France is the bigger stadium now, but the Parc des Princes is a historic stadium. Uh, yeah, there's the Olympic Stadion in Berlin. The Well, unfortunately, the Sham Manesh in Bilbao's gone now, and the Mestalla in Valencia is, I think, different now. Um, but no, not the new camp or the Bernabeu. Wouldn't want to go there. I think they're overrated. But that's my opinion, isn't it? Really, there are some other stadiums that I would like to go and see. Um, that for me have a bit more resonance for me as a sports fan for various reasons. I mean, I would like to see the old Stadio Flaminio, the old home of Italian Rugby Union. It's still standing. It's still there. It's just not in use at the moment. There were plans to redevelop it, and they never came to fruition because of the economic financial crash. In, the financial crash sort of curtailed that, but this is Italian public spending, so they never complete their public projects. But obviously, the Stadio Olimpico is a fine piece of sporting infrastructure. Um, I've been down the court. I've been to the San Moritz bobsleigh luge run. That was an experience. Um, that was fun. Going down that. Done that. I've walked it as well. Walked the perimeter road and all that. So I've been there. That is something that sticks with me. But there are some stadiums I would like to see. The trademark style, a high press counter attack, so the 4-3-3 kind of, that's part of the style. Basically, your Jurgen Klopp and your Ralph Hasenhüttl cut their teeth in the Bundesliga. Um, the way they set up their teams is the Bundesliga style, pretty much through and through. So if you watch Southampton or Liverpool play, that's pretty much the Bundesliga style in a nutshell. Not every team in the Bundesliga or German football plays that way, but a high energy, high press, counter attack football is, generally what you get. So the German game is surprisingly very, very open. Because if both sides play that kind of counter-attacking style, you don't have these slow, methodical builds up of possession. It's more fast-paced possession. You don't have teams parking the bus in German football, which is why Greuther Fürth have got such a shocking record in the Bundesliga this season, because they don't park the bus. They play that style. They still want to play their DNA. So you don't get the underdog teams park the bus and try and get a 1-0. Every team in the German system plays a high press, high counter attack style. It doesn't matter if it's a 4-3-3 or any other formation. Always a high press, counter attack style, and it's quick paced. Slow possession football is not a German thing in the last 20 years. So if you look at the way Klopp sets his teams up, or Husenhartel, pressing on the ball, in your face press, whole team presses as a unit, turn it over, quick counter attack, is a trademark style. And a lot of the trademark is also developing through the youth ranks. A lot more players that get to play in the first team have come through the youth system of clubs as well, which is why German football has a higher percentage of German players playing on a match day weekend. Than I think it's the highest percentage of domestic players playing in the league structure than any other European league, by a long way. That's another trademark of the Bundesliga. And the second Bundesliga is more homegrown talent playing on a match day weekend than other European leagues. It's just something I've noted over many years of watching sport, is the Bundesliga has a higher percentage of homegrown talent on a match day than contemporary leagues. Wasn't always the case, but pre 1980, almost every domestic league it was homegrown talent. Obviously, the game's gone more global, but the German league tends to have a higher percentage of homegrown talent of the European leagues. South American leagues is a different conversation, but the best South American players end up in Europe anyway. But if you're looking at the South American leagues and the makeup of their team, different kettle of fish. But European leagues, that's well, I was born in what is now Germany. I was born in West Germany, near Dortmund, in Münster, just north of Dortmund, near the Dutch border. So Borussia Dortmund and Bayer Leverkusen, I have a soft spot for those sides. Another friend, a couple of my friends, their parents were also military as well. So I've got an affinity, I think, with football in Germany, like Hamburg, Hamburg SV, Werder Bremen, Kaiserslautern, Borussia Dortmund, Bayer Leverkusen, VfB Stuttgart. So I have Eintracht Frankfurt, Hanover SV. So yeah, I have a soft spot for the German league. My old classics teacher, yes, I went to posh school, was a Schalke fan, big Schalke fan. It's a difficult one because I like to see Borussia Dortmund and Bayer Leverkusen do really well. I've got a soft spot for Werder Bremen because I used to live near Bremen. It's a difficult one. I don't have a favourite German team as such, if I'm being honest. But looking at the history of German football and the amount of European club games like the Cup Winners' Cup back in the day. Yes, I'm that old. I'm in my early. I'm actually near 33. So yeah, people forget I'm in my early 30s. I forget I'm in my early 30s. If I'm going back 25 years, I remember the Cup Winners' Cup, defunct competition, the old UEFA Cup, now Europa League, Champions League. I remember watching German sides, get to the knockout stages, win the competition, like Bayern Munich and Borussia Dortmund have won it. Hamburg, obviously, and Schalke have played European finals. Borussia Mönchengladbach got a great history in Europe. You got Hertha Berlin, underrated sides. You got Cologne, Stuttgart. Just the list of sides, just and the history that they have within the game. Yeah. I prefer, for me, I prefer the German and Italian leagues over Spain. So if I wasn't really, to be fair, when it comes to football, I prefer watching the cup games rather than the league games. So if we're talking about regular season, doesn't really I'm not really interested in that. I prefer watching Champions League, Europa League, FA Cup. As I say, the old Cup Winners' Cup when it was still a competition in the 90s. I like watching the cup competitions more than regular league play, and I obviously like international tournaments as well. That's where I watch my football. I don't really follow regular season when it comes to European football, apart from the domestic and European Cup competitions, if when I can actually watch games. Um, and I've always had that affinity. Unfortunately, in recent years, the TV rights, which I've discussed to death on this channel, and if you wish to look at previous live streams and videos, feel free. The TV rights, at least in the UK, aren't good. The Champions League and Europa League are on subscription only, which for us Europeans is not a good thing. That's quite bad actually, because we are fiercely defend our rights to free to air TV coverage. And that's gone down badly with fans. Fans are feeling priced out, they're feeling angry, not listened to, and the TV deals reflect that. And So we feel as fans that we're missing out on um, Champions League and Europa League access and the European Super League debacle last summer. Yeah, that's been building for a while, and fans were very angry, saying, "Well, there's a reason why younger kids aren't watching, and there's a reason why the average age of a fan in attendance is going up, and the average fan age of buying the subscription is going up. Because younger fans have been priced out, they're being shut out." And when you've got Florentino Perez saying, "Well, young people aren't interested in it," yeah, because he priced us out. That's basically it. That's well done. Caused this, we agreed. So, well, I understand the US, you know, networks and how cable TV and satellite TV and the streaming services, how it's different. The culture is different. In Europe, we fiercely defend our right to free to air coverage and accessibility. Um, and there's been pushback, and I think the professional sports realizing the pushback is there. So it's being felt, and we're seeing a return to more free to air coverage um, uh, of a lot of sport. It's coming back to free to air coverage, and there's definitely been um, pushback. Montpellier has actually got quite a big fan base in France. Ironically, you'll be surprised. Montpellier has got a big fan base in France. It's got a bigger fan base than PSG. PSG is not the biggest French club for fan base and history, not by a long shot. Lyon, Lille, Saint Etienne, Montpellier, Marseille, Nancy, all have got far more history, and Toulouse, Bordeaux, far more popular with registered fans, members. PSG is a plastic club. It's an amalgamation of several clubs that failed and had to merge together in 1970. Um, so yeah, Monaco is one of them. Um, it's a state, so it's the national team as well. If you think about it, because Monaco doesn't actually have a national side, and the stadium is in two countries, and it's the only professional sports stadium that has a mainline railway station underneath it, not a metro, a mainline railway station actually directly underneath it. So it's got the best transport links in the world. It's got an international railway line underneath it and a train station, and it's in two countries. One of the ends of the stadium is actually in France, the rest of it's in Monaco, and there is actually a mainline railway station directly underneath the stadium, not a metro, which is different because obviously Madison Square Garden and things like that have metro lines. No, it has a main railway line directly underneath that links southern France into Italy. I'm not making that up. Check it out for yourself. Um, but no, Montpellier has got a bigger fan base than PSG. Monaco's got a better history historically than PSG. More historical club. PSG is the ultimate plastic club. The ultimate plastic club. Um, so yeah, uh, um, and the French league is in trouble. The TV deal is not not best. Um, oh god, my phone is blown up. Um, oh my god. Okay, so a lot of notifications. have come through all at the same time on and I've got a missed call from my mum, and oh god, right, hang on a sec. I need to actually. I think well, my nan's seriously in hospital, so the fact that my mum's phoned me is not a good sign. So bear with me 1 second. Um, bear with me. Yeah, my nan's seriously ill in hospital, so I've got to take this. I've got to make a phone call. Oh, come on, answer the phone. My phone has just exploded. I don't know why. Welcome to the O2. Oh God, I just don't understand. Oh bloody hell, my phone has exploded. So, um, oh, the Monaco Stadium. Yeah, no, the Monaco Stadium is actually quite a nice facility. I'm not gonna lie, it's actually quite a beautiful little stadium. It's not a big stadium. It only seats about 20,000. Maybe I think 15, 20,000. It's not a big stadium. Um, it's um, there is no doubting the facility is beautiful. But the team in recent years has not been um, as as successful as it could have been. Um, they've obviously made a Champions League final many years ago, nearly 20 years ago now. But as I say, not had the um, the success I think they should have had, um, which other French teams have had. So yeah, it's one of them. But Monaco's had some great players play for the club. Arsene Wenger used to manage them. Thierry Henry used to play for them and manage them as well. So they've had some great players play for AS Monaco over the years. Um, but obviously not had the success that maybe they could have. Um, but that's there's a whole load of reasons why they haven't had that success. And yeah, there's been some poor uh, decisions taken by management in the transfer market in that regard. And God, my Instagram's blown up as well. But the stadium, you just look at the photographs. It's surprising. It is actually it's got an athletics track as well. It's a multi-use stadium. It's a beautiful little stadium. I'm not gonna lie. It's a fantastic venue, a historical venue with some of the games that have been played there. Um, it's on the smaller side when we come to UEFA rankings on stadiums, and um, but yeah, um, it's one of them. It's just really weird. It's got a railway station directly beneath it on the main line from Nice to Liguria, so Genova in Italy. It's got a mainline railway station underneath the main stand, and it's in two countries. It's one of the few stadiums that are in two countries. I think Chester City Stadium is another stadium that's in two countries as well, but it's technically in two different sovereign nations. Um, but I remember watching many a European Super Cup played there. Um, AS Monaco played many a Champions League match there as well. And Monaco itself. I mean, come on, the Monaco Grand Prix. It's Monaco is a that the Côte d'Azur is a beautiful part of the world. Um, if ever you've been to the Côte d'Azur or the Ligurian coast, that part of Italy and France, it is a stunning part of the world. Um, Absolutely stunning part of the world. When you drive across the south coast of France up to the northwest coast of Italy, it's as I say, stunning part of the world, and oh, you couldn't ask for a more beautiful location for a sports venue with the views you get and the history behind, why the stadium's there, why the club exists, why it plays in the French league system. Um, Bit of a quirk, that really. But yeah, I wouldn't say Monaco is a smaller League One team. They've got a lot of success and a lot of history in the competition. They just play one of the smaller stadiums, but it's a beautiful stadium. And that's not one of the stadiums. The Prince Albert, the Prince Rainier. Is it Rainier or Albert? I think it's Rainier Stadium. It's definitely on my bucket list, simply because of where it is and the view you get of the Mediterranean, Ligurian Sea. It's stunning. The views are stunning. Um, and it's just a beautiful part of the world. The Côte d'Azur, stunning part of the world. Expensive, but a stunning part of the world nonetheless. And then literally about 12 miles down the road is Nice. So you're in a nice part of the world with a lot of history to it as well. So, it's one of them where sport and history meet together on culture, and it's quite nice. It's part of France where Italian is spoken as a second language as well. So it's a very historically important part of the world for European history and the direction of Italy and France historically as well. But it's definitely a part of the world I want to go to. But Monaco is not one of the smaller clubs. Very successful club in French football historically. Some great players played for Monaco over the years. And Arsene Wenger is the most famous manager Monaco's ever had. Thierry Henry is the most famous player to play for them, I think. Um, and he's managed them as well. So really interesting, Monaco. But yeah, so I'm going to have to call that a stream because I've got to be up in 4.5 hours. Thank you very much for all your questions. Really appreciate it. It's always great to see new people in the chat and new subscribers. So Jake, thank you very much for joining us. And yeah, hopefully, obviously, you get to see some new faces soon and see the channel grow. It's always quite nice. And obviously, there's some big sports stories that we're following, like the Zuma situation. Didn't really talk about that a lot tonight, even though that was one of the first questions that was raised. Zuma and his younger brother both been suspended by their clubs, and they're both under investigation, and they will not be playing for further notice. And Mason Greenwood, again, still not part of the United setup, still suspended. Nike have now terminated their sponsorship of him. So there's some players who've done some silly things. So yeah, we'll follow developments in those situations as they progress. Of course, the Super Bowl's taking place, but I'm not watching that tonight. I've got to be up, so I've got to get some sleep. And yeah, I think the Bengals might win. But this is the first time in the Super Bowl that both quarterbacks have actually got a losing regular season record professionally since they've debuted in the league. So bear that in mind. That's never happened before. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, thank you very much for watching and all your questions, and I really appreciate it. And I'll have some more videos for you very, very soon.